a work session to go through some of these things. We'll set a time limit on this, and we'll go until 7 o'clock, since we can't really conduct any business tonight, but we can at least maybe go over some things, maybe get some questions answered, maybe get some discussion going that will maybe help to fast track things on Thursday. So,
Might ask what would be, what we could accomplish, like, if it was, talk about the keys, because that budget has changed, and some of those.
yeah, what I was primarily hoping to do this week, since we're still waiting for the state information, is maybe we'll take that up next week when we got a little bit more, know what is going to be all those pieces in the puzzle, so to speak, to start trying to get that budget taken out. But I was hoping to do tonight is to, and this week, is to get our facilities budget knocked out. And I know that's what Stan, Mr. Breeden, and his office have done work on to prepare something for us. Let's maybe just go through that real quick, Mr. Breeden, the budget that your office is proposing for us to take a look at as part of our capital.
What I will do is tell you that we've tried to put together something to at least give you a starting place, instead of just letting everybody walk in with no basis. And so we've tried to base this kind of on the information that we've gone through with you recently, and we've made some assumptions. And so these are the assumptions that are made to kind of lead to a last page here, which produces the budget. So I thought we'd walk these, and again, these are assumptions that you haven't decided on, but this is just to give you something to start from.
We got to start somewhere.
Right.
So this is good.
So the first assumption that we've made here is that we're continuing to use this year's capital outlay funds, the money that we got in the bond, and also that's been supplemented from some money that came from fund balance and some other sources that we have, but all of that to finish that $16.5 million list. As we told you at the last facilities meeting, currently, because of the fact that we have taken over $5 million of that to do the addition at Marvin Wright, we're actually about $2.7 million short of being able to do everything as it was on the list originally, with the things that you've already voted on and we've marked off. Now, we have not gone through and made any adjustments for anything that you've voted on, with the exception of we have not done anything with the plumbing. I know we just got the plumbing stuff in that you just approved, so we've not made any changes on that. So I will tell you that those numbers are still where they were, and I want to explain just a few minutes why we did that.
But just to briefly summarize what you were going over. So last year, we took a certain number of items on the EMG list,
Which totaled $16.5 million.
So the $16.5 million list. Went over, they gave us funding for those items. We've been using some of that funding to try to make repairs. We also had to use some of that funding for the Marvin Wright addition.
Right.
But what you're saying, this first paragraph on the board, is we can still cover everything on that $16.5 million, with the exception of we're about 2.7.
That's
short.
correct. That's correct.
Okay.
Which we would need to make up from another source, possibly. Now, what I will tell you is we may not need to spend all of that as we continue to work through the list. There may be some savings, like we've already seen from the plumbing, because there was about $2.something million worth of plumbing recommendations there, which we're doing for. You voted on last time, it was less than $100,000. I don't remember. I don't have those numbers right here in front of me. But I haven't made those adjustments yet.
But the main thing is, you may be able to squeeze
some more money out.
Squeeze it out where you're actually able to cover everything on the 16.5.
Possibly. That is possible.
With maybe not having to have 2.7.
Right.
To go replenish that pot. Now, one thing, we're jumping ahead just a little bit. Mr. Parliament sent me his best updated fund balance information, what he's projecting, what we may have available in fund balance after June 30th. And I don't know if everyone's had an opportunity to look at that yet, as far as what may be going into that fund balance. But it appears, thus far, based upon available information, all this is subject to change. It's a constant, moving target as to what revenue's coming in, what expenditures are going out. But it appears that if that would be the will of the board and the committee, that there's sufficient funding, possibly in fund balance, to replenish that and then still have other money left over. And also, it looks like there's sufficient funding, or potential sufficient funding to be able to cover the, what is it, roughly 3 point in the keys, what was it? Okay, so you all remember, we're jumping ahead a little bit, the GP budget that's been proposed as far as that key list, there's a certain column. One column would be where we would try to fund it out of our regular year-to-year GP budget. And then we've got another column where we would basically be a one-time deal that we would be able to use our savings or fund balance. So it looks like we may have available in our fund balance to be able to cover that as well. And still possibly still have some other funds. Now, again, this is all estimates, but just wanted to kind of talk about that just real briefly. So, sorry, Mr. Breeden, I just wanted to kind of talk about that just a little bit. So the proposal that you all have, well, I'll just go ahead and let you finish up with your presentation.
Yeah, let me go on through the rest of it, because the next one is one, again, this is just a suggestion to the board to consider, and that is, at the last facilities meeting, we talked about the recommendation that was coming from the central office was that we would rebuild McDowell and refurbish Baker. The original money that was in the $16.5 million that was designated for Baker that we haven't yet really spent. Again, I didn't take into consideration that plumbing. That just got approved last Thursday night, and I did this before that. But it's really not very much money. But it was $3.2 million. So instead of taking those savings from things, you could say, well, we're going to go ahead and use that money to refurbish Baker, put together a plan to refurbish Baker. Now, we know that Train has told us there is some electrical repairs. They haven't brought us final price, approximately $500,000 maybe of electrical repairs to be made there. But the rest of that money, we could say, well, the plumbing was estimated at $1 million and only cost $10,000, so we'll roll no, there wasn't any plumbing there. There was about $1 million with plumbing. There wasn't any plumbing recommended. So we could take that $1 million and move it back for some of these other things, or you could say we're going to keep it and do renovations at Baker. It's one of the options you could consider. Does that make sense to everybody? But that's what we said here, is you just could take all that and renovate Baker if the board chose to do that. So that's the way we've put this plan together. The next thing is, let me see, did I go too far? Yes. Well, no. Okay. Then if we did that, then we would take and move forward with the rest of these recommendations with a funding request for this year. So that really pretty much takes care of everything from last year, and then everything moving forward would be the funding request for this year. So the first one of those is the construction of a new elementary school on the Malin-Moore property. Tentative construction budget, and this is what we had set, of $24,943,000. That does not include the design fees, which you've already funded. The original total cost we'd figured was about $26 million, and we've taken off that million, a little over $1 million that you've already funded out of the money we had this year. So that leaves $24,943. Now, I will tell you that we have had 2 meetings. Matter of fact, we just came from one. I drove straight from Brentwood to here. 2 meetings where the team who's working on architects, engineers, and construction people, along with the Hewlett Spencer, the kind of team they've put together, have been taking the design that's been semi-completed. It's not fully complete, but it's complete enough that they've started to do some cost estimates. And so we are working on cost estimates to see where we can get on this. And when we left today, I'm pleased to announce that we figured this budget on $220 a square foot for construction, and we got it down to about $208 a square foot, which is really good news. We've done a lot of pencil sharpening, and we've done some give and take. Now the bad news, I always tell you good news and bad news, is that is on the construction. However, the site work is more than we anticipated. About $4 million?
Closer to $4.5
million. So based on this, and I've got Mr. Hewlett here, and I'd really like for him to speak to this because he can speak to it better than I can. But so this budget still, we're not able to whittle it down. As a matter of fact, it's probably a little bit short right now, but we're still, it has been not bid out competitively like they will do. So, but it's where we're at on estimation.
Well, I'm not going to say a lot about it other than to really compliment Stan. He came up with his numbers, if you will, on his own, gathering information. And then after all this work that's been done, the schematics that's the part of the design that we have that we're working from. And after all of this work, and even with that cost, and one thing that it's good that we've been working together for a while, because we never stop trying to find ways to save money. That's part of our process. But Stan got this to where that after all of this collaboration that we've been doing for several weeks, coming together in meetings and then everybody going back and doing their work and then coming back today for a meeting that we just really went through details, and we got within about $1 million of Stan's number on that. That's where he said, the cost per foot is one thing, but it's the total cost, and the site work is a big number. But we're going to look for ways to try to do some savings in that as well. But with what we have today, and lots been put into this to get us to that. That number should be about $1 million more than Stan first estimated.
Could you all talk, and I appreciate that there is the collaboration and the work going on to maybe look at the construction costs. As far as the site prep work, could you all maybe just help the members have some idea, without maybe getting too technical, as to what's going on that's potentially increasing those costs?
I think the first thing I need to say about that is that all of these things are estimates. And these are, the site work is an estimate by the civil engineer, not a bid. We don't have the documentation to where we can bid it yet. So that's the first thing that you need to make a note of. And the other thing is that there's just we've moved the school, we've done some things. It was even more than that until we moved the school a little bit on the property to cut down. We cut out about 40,000 cubic yards of earth by just moving the school. So, but that number, when we say the site work, that's everything outside of the school itself, which means driveways, sidewalks. The loop road is a big number, that loop road. Now, you need that for safety. That road in front of the school that's going to be put in from Hummingbird Lane across the property around back to Malin Moore is going to be a city road. So you don't want cars stacking out there. You have a safety issue. So that loop road is probably the major single thing other than just the general site work. But that includes sidewalks, curbs, all the underground drainage that has to go in with it. So,
and I guess what I was wondering is, so if maybe, and I understand these are estimates, but if the estimate on that particular work, the site work, including the road, is maybe increased by maybe around 4 million more than what the original estimate, is that because of something unforeseen has come up? That have we made changes as far as where the road might be located, or if we ran into things, or is that just construction expenses?
It's not 4 to 4.5 million more than was originally estimated. The number that Stan had and the new number that would be $1 million more is being generated more by the site work than anything else. So if it were 4 million more, then that number would have to be The site work's about $1 million more, I guess, than what Stan would have had estimated, is the way I'm trying to say it. Or, well, no, probably $1.5 million or some, because he used a larger square footage number. That's the problem with trying to use these estimates and bouncing around like that. But it's probably $1.5 million more than Stan would have used in his estimate, or that would have been effective in his number.
And I can show you right here on this drawing, if you can see, the site work is basically everything here in the site. If you'll notice these contour lines right here, the only thing I know about contour lines is when they're closer together, that means the slope is steeper. So you can notice right in here, they're a little closer together, so there is some fall off here. They're having to do some cut and fill, is that what that's called?
Balancing the site.
Yeah, balance. So there's some cut and fill to do here, but also with this site, there is design, because of the situation we've got into at Marvin Wright, there is a loop road all the way around the building. Now, that's contributing to part of that site work cost. And it's a larger road actually than is on the Marvin Wright. Probably about $1 million for that road, and maybe we miscalculated that. So the combination of this cut and fill and this road, I think, is what's making the site costs go up. Now, you know, one of the things, I mean, we don't have to have that road. We could leave that off, but right now we're trying to avoid that because of situations we've got into in the Spring Hill area with traffic on other schools.
Mr. Atkinson.
Yeah, I just, first question I wanted to ask, the $24,943,000, is that turnkey, that's seats,
That's
lighting?
That's everything, yes, sir. That's furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, all
Whatever teachers, and they're ready to go in, straight in?
That's right, yes, sir.
Cafeteria, everything?
playground set
Playground.
up, furnished, that's everything there, yes, sir.
And well, we'll be in, if we don't do the loop road, we'll be in the same situation as was in Marvin Wright.
Right.
With the traffic, eventually. Not right now probably, but eventually will be. And that's my understanding, that was a 2-lane road going around the back for double stacking the cars.
That
that
is
need to
correct,
be.
yes, sir.
Okay.
That is correct. Now, as Mr. Hewlett said, this road here, you know, we're still in negotiations with City Spring Hill. We're hoping they're going to build this entire road through there in turn from, you know, what we'd like to bring you is a recommendation. We give them this property for their park, and they build the road, including the bridge across the creek. And they've expressed some, you know, when talking with, we have not gone before their Board of Mayor and Aldermen yet, but just talking to city officials, they've expressed some interest in doing that. We're also including even talking to the county highway department about helping out with this. So we've got several folks that, you know, we're trying to involve in the process, but it's part of the decision today was what are we going to do out on this end where the high school, we're going to bring you a recommendation next week at the zoning facilities about how we think the high school and middle school would be laid out, which where the road would be positioned. So possibly the entire road could go ahead and be built now, which would be a big plus too. But
And I know there's certainly a lot of, it's all possibilities, but if the city did have an interest in doing some partnerships, that sort of thing, would that affect this particular budget, or is that more in the future it would help?
it probably would not, because right now we have not included the cost of this road in this budget. If we have to build this road right here, then we might have to make, you're probably looking at, we said today, $500,000 or $600,000 to build that road right there. But I mean, we're talking about that being built to be a city street. And what we're talking about is this would ultimately be a city of Spring Hill street that they would maintain. It would not be our property. So we would want to build it in a way that it would be. But again, we still have hopes we can make that happen. Obviously, if it didn't, then we'd have to make some adjustments. You know, if this is not going to be a city street early on, it's just our drive, we may not need this around. We can stack the cars up back here. But if it becomes a city street, we really were going to want to stack the cars around here. So it gives us some flexibility. That trying to keep costs down as much as we can, and look at options to do that.
My only problem is, if the city does not want to do it right now, later on they might, then you would have to have Loop Road
You would.
again. So there we are again, spending more money and put Loop Road in later. So
Yeah. Makes sense. It's always cheaper to do stuff today.
do it now. That's just my opinion. We need to do it. If we're gonna build it, we need to do it now and surely save some costs on that.
So again, since I gave you those numbers to go back to where we were, if I can get that back up on the screen, since we gave you this number right here, they're recommending we add $1 million to that for site work. Am I saying that right? Is that what you?
Well, you are if you want to have a more exact number.
As a budget.
As a budget, it's, instead of 24, I gotta find my number now. Instead of 24,943, it's not a full $1 million. It would be 25,850,000 for a budget number. And that includes all the things you asked about.
And again, the reason I haven't updated this, we just got this afternoon. It was the second. First meeting, we actually went in, we looked at some costs. We actually cut out a lot of things from the first meeting. And when I say things, it wasn't anything that impacts the design of the building, the integrity of the building. It's things that are changes in material, some kinds of material. We did go out, we changed some like ceiling material, some floor covering, kind of different kinds of floor covering. We did reduce square footage in the building in a couple of places by a small amount. Wasn't anything significant. I don't remember what all we did.
Doors is, glass doors.
Yeah, we actually came up with a pretty big savings on a manufacture of a door type and that kind of stuff. So just recommending some different materials. So we've been working through a value engineering process to get it down, but we've got it pretty, from what I saw today, pretty skinny for the building we've got for schematics.
You gotta get to DDs that you can put out on the street and hard bid them to get it down to the market number.
Yeah. So that, any other questions on that? I'll move on. I know we set a time limit here. The next thing on the list is the design and construction of addition. We've talked to you about this already. The addition to Spring Hill High School to add infrastructure and parking to accommodate 1,600 students, which is cafeteria, kitchen, new cafeteria, new kitchen, new auditorium, additional media space, and then converting the existing kitchen to a culinary lab and adding parking. And we've come up with a budget of that, which would include everything for that of and that also is including some additional furnishings, $8,732,300. The next one is the design and construction of a replacement facility for McDowell Elementary, 500 student capacity, utilizing the remaining design fees. We do have a proposal right now that they could get to a cost, kind of what we just talked about now, to get to that kind of cost estimate by spending about $219,500. We've got a proposal we haven't presented to you yet. We did it in response. You remember there was a motion on the board agenda the other night, what I think the board deferred on, to look at what it would cost to get to, and we've got a figure of $219,000 to do that. We've got enough left in the design fees from the $16.5 million that we could fund that. Then that would leave a budget of $17,680,806. And I did this budget just like we did the last budget. Same kind of, it's everything. And again, it's not knowing because we're not far enough along to get the numbers we got today, but we did the same kind of budget. Again, our recommendation, there is $4,283,790 in the $16.5 million bond that was designated for EMG. Put that against this cost. which would leave an additional need of $13,397,016, and we put that in our 17-18 funding request.
So I understand, Mr. Breeden, this is a preliminary number.
It is.
But from a preliminary standpoint, you're saying that if we utilize the existing funding that we already received last year for McDowell, we could possibly rebuild a school for another around 13.3 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that would be what the request would be if we went to
Yes, sir.
the commission. Okay.
Then the other thing that we would ask for in funding request is design fees for a new middle school. Again, we've set a tentative budget for what we think that would cost and backed into what design fees would be. We've talked to ESA about this. But what concerns me, and I talked with the staff about this yesterday, is our current enrollment at Spring Hill Middle School is 904 students. We're growing about 100 students a year. We've done that for the last couple of years there. The capacity of that building is 1,000. The best we could do, if we got design fees now and broke ground next year, we'd be talking about 2020 to move into that building. Dr. Register's numbers projected us being at 1,250 students, 1,250 students at Spring Hill Middle School by 2020. So we're going to have to come up with some, and we've talked about some interim solutions that we could possibly implement there. Right now, could possibly free up 4 classrooms. I met with assistant principal last week. We walked through the building. That would mean, like, currently we have a science lab and a science classroom. That'd be turning that science classroom into something else and moving the science classroom into the lab. That's 2 rooms. We've got 2 other ones being used by the Boys and Girls Club. We'd have to put them out and turn that into a classroom, and I can't remember what the other one was for. Maybe there's some computer labs. So we might be able to stretch it to 1,100 students, maybe is what we figured. But at best, we're going to run out of space before we can get something built. So we need to get design fees and get started on that ASAP. So that's why we put that in there.
Ms. Morency?
I had a question on the remaining funds for the capital outlay, expending the funds with the exception of Baker, McDowell, and Mount Pleasant. So what you're saying, because I think some of the concern of the board was that you were pulling Baker, McDowell, and Mount Pleasant out of the EMG report, that money, but you're not using those funds that were designated for those schools towards the rest, completing the 16.5 million.
Yeah, no. We're not recommending using those toward fixing other schools. We'd still spend it on those schools, on those schools, but just in a different way.
Okay, and I think that was part of a misunderstanding that a lot of it, at least I did, that there was concern that we were pulling that money out and we were going to fix other schools and not have the money to do those. But that's not what you're recommending.
No, we'd recommend that.
Okay, that clears it up.
We'd
and
use
that
the
sounds-
Baker money to refurbish Baker. We'd use the McDowell
Okay.
money to build a new McDowell. And then you're going to see in a few minutes, we're recommending using what's left in the Mount Pleasant elementary funds to start working on the addition to Mount Pleasant Middle School.
I just wanted to, because I know that there was some concern on the board for that, so thank you.
Yeah.
That makes much better sense to me.
And we know there, again, and let me just say that last year we were asked to put together a list. We put together pretty quickly, and it listed some different schools. But we understand when you say you're going to spend this much money on my school, people get concerned if you take it and spend it on somebody. I understand how that works. We don't always look at it that way. We try to just look at what are the most prioritized needs. We try to be more colorblind towards schools than that, but I understand communities and responsibilities and that kind of stuff, so we're trying to do that.
Well, actually, I mean, I think the concern was that you had the 3 schools that needed the most work, and we
Right.
were pulling them out, and it just, I think a lot of us were under the assumption
Sure.
that when we pulled them out, we also pulled the money away from those. So I'm glad to hear that. I think that straightens it out. Thank you.
And some of it is a learning experience because I don't think we've ever got funding, or it's been a long time since we actually got funding. So Stan, I did want to go back and talk a little bit about the middle school at Spring Hill. If the numbers that what you're talking about right now, as far as the projections and when we're going to have the need, should we go ahead and ask for the funding for the construction of the school right now, rather than just the design costs? Or does that not change anything from a logistical standpoint? We would still be on the same timetable.
We could possibly do it a little quicker if we got all the funding this year, because, the anticipation is if we got the funding, realistically, it's probably going to be September, October. That's typically, by the time it goes through the county commission, they issue a bond and we get the money. That's when we've got it to begin. So if we started design work then, we could probably be ready to come back with a GMP about, I think we're on about a 6 to 8 month
What
window.
you're trying to get to is when the school could be available would be August 19th.
You think we get,
We could get on that track.
so we can move it
But
up a year?
logically, it would seem like if we already have the funding, that maybe we could shave off a year
We possibly
of
could.
the opening
Yes,
of the
sir.
doors.
We could.
Now, where that year falls, as far as out in the future, that's the difficult thing. But it would just seem logistically that we could shave off a year. I guess from the numbers that you all are looking at, do we need to be looking at trying to get those doors open maybe as soon as possible?
I would say yes.
Yes.
As I think, part of me is kind of what we've had to deal with the Marvin Wright edition, that we've had to react, and then we've ended up having to, from my perspective, I would have liked to had, and all this is difficult with the population changes. It's difficult to kind of
Yep.
get our arms wrapped around it, but I would have liked to have seen, where we'd already been in the process of having a new school ready to open, where we wouldn't even have to be looking at portables or addition, that sort of thing. And I just don't want us to end up in that same
Yep.
scenario if we can potentially avoid it, or at least we can potentially mitigate it if we start now.
And that's why we're talking tonight. Stan brought this up. I think he woke up 3 a.m. on Monday and had like, we got to move. And so we talked about this in executive with Stan going, do we need to add this? And the prevailing view among executive is yes, we need to start moving now. This is, yeah.
And what we've calculated again, and we're budgeting still on this $220 square foot and FF&E and those kind of things. Dr. Register had recommended a 750 student school with a core for 1,000 that you could add on to later. And so that number we've been budgeting about $33 million for total cost. Which you can see is it's not much larger size student population than the elementary, but you got more money because it's a middle school. You have athletic facilities, you have some additional space that you need in a middle school, like a full-size gymnasium, auditorium, and those kind of things that you don't have in an elementary school. So it
Okay.
adds to the space.
Of course, the practical part of all this is if we added that to, we're getting a little bit ahead, this 10-year plan where y'all got, in column 1 would be what we would be asking the commission
Yes,
for this year. If we move the 30 million over in that column, that changes the
Yes, sir.
dynamics of things tremendously. But then we're also, I think as board members, we've got to deal with what the needs are. I mean, whatever those numbers are, if there's a need that we need to address, then we've got to do what we've got to do on some of those things. So I don't know. Mr. Moore.
Getting close to 7 p.m., so I'm going to jump right in. And no offense to anybody else on this, but like I said, as I've looked at this, and I'm glad you asked that, Mr. Bates, on the about the middle school. Is that loud to everybody else?
You're good.
Okay. As I look at this, there's a lot of difficult decisions because I see a lot of things that honestly, I know we've got them spread out over years 1 through 5, but there's a lot of things here that were money not an option, we would be trying to take care of this year. I mean, I think it's the same problem we ran into when we did the EMG report. There were a lot of things that should have been done years ago, and we really should have been able to do them all at once. But for me, I'm struggling to try to find how do we manage all of these pieces and make them fit and get them funded is the other piece. So as I look at this, and I'll just say personally, and some people may disagree with where I'm going with this, but I have to look at what I see is we've got two problems here. We've been trying to manage a maintenance and an upkeep issue, and we're trying to manage a growth issue. And it seems to me that we are getting beat up trying to do both at the same time. And I know to some extent we're going to still have to do both at the same time. But it feels like we would make better progress at this point if we could really, in some way, get ahead of the growth issue. Get a little bit ahead of it, because I think we're making great strides in the maintenance side and getting the upkeep. I think we're getting everything in place to be, that's starting to, it's not perfect yet, but it's really getting to a point where I think it can keep going on its own in the next couple of years if we keep watering that flower. So the growth thing is the thing that I really want us to get ahead of. So as I start looking at these lists in the 5-year plan, I'm making all of my decisions based on what gets us ahead of growth. And just to look at the years 1 and 2 there, when I skip over to the next page, personally, the McDowell Elementary School, I understand something needs to be done there, but that's not a year 1 for me, because it doesn't move the growth needle. It doesn't address any of the growth issues that I see that we're having to deal with right now. Then I'm just going, like I said, going down the list. The Mount Pleasant Middle, the K through 8 edition, I still am not understanding fully the rationale for that one. I know it came up in Dr. Register's report, but it still to me just doesn't make sense. Maybe I'm wrong. Somebody can explain to me why I'm wrong. That's fine. I'm fine with that. We've got the new number, the 25,850, the 25,850,000 for the elementary school that's gone up. And as Mr. Bates said, to me it seems like we need to be asking for the middle school at Spring Hill as well at the same time. We need to be doing both of those schools. I mean, it seems, again, to me, obvious on that. The Spring Hill High School, I'm not I understand the reasoning behind the almost $9 million for that, but I don't think it's necessary. I think there's parts of that are necessary. I think the parking, I think there's some other issues, but I think there's other pieces. I just think we have other places those dollars need to be spent right now, such as the middle school in Spring Hill that we need to be building. So I think that needs to be a much smaller number this year to meet the needs, not just the needs and the wants of getting that. Now, again, with the understanding that most of these things I'm moving out of year 1 still are going to have to be done in year 2 or 3. I mean, that's a given. That's kind of where I'm at on looking at moving things around. I've talked to, I think, Stan on most of this stuff, and I've talked to Chris on most of this stuff as well. But that's where I see we need to be able to try to get ahead of the growth. And that, like the big thing to me is the elementary school and the middle school and getting those built and start where we can have some breathing room to start looking at these other issues and tackle them. And while I understand that, like I said, I fully understand that McDowell, if I'm not doing it this year, we've got to come back and do it next year, or we got to start talking. We don't just push it to the side and forget about these things. These things have still got to be talked about and got to be done sometime. I just feel like we've got to get started on this growth issue, or we are going to be, as he said, less than 100 students capacity left. If we're lucky, maybe 150 at Spring Hill Middle School. And the way the top of the county, there's nowhere for those kids to go. We can't move them around. That's just the reality of where they're at up there. I mean, there may be some room at Cox. That'll be a fun thing to get into. But that's really it. So you really only have maybe one option to kind of move some of those kids around, and you really can't move a lot without messing up how we've got the zone set up and really kind of destroying how that's done. So to me, that would make more sense to move those things up to year 1 and move some of those things to year 2, kind of do a flip-flop on that. But I think the other piece that's not included in here that is, I know that Dr. Marzek doesn't want to do it, but I think we have to look at a countywide rezone as part of this as well. I mean, I see an emergency with the growth issue again. And I know we've kind of slowed down talking about that since we just got over dealing with the Marvin Wright edition. We felt like we made some headway there. We're about to have to do the same kind of, oh my gosh, this is right. We're going to be dealing with that here probably a little bit this summer, to be honest. But I think we need to, I think we need to start talking about that now so that when we're not just waiting to do a last-minute move on that. And I'd be happy to hear what you have to say, Chris.
Well, I mean, that last thing, when I came here, that's one of the things that I talked to you guys. I'm not a fan of rezoning. I think people move to an area because they want their kids to go to that school. However, we do have some unequal sides of our district. We have a lot of kids in one area and not many kids in another area. Like Woodard was put in place because growth was coming and the neighborhood stalled. And now Woodard is, I think, an underutilized building that can be better utilized if we did some shifting around. Realize that Dr. Register said no matter what decision you make with the rezoning, he would recommend that once it's finalized, it's a year before it's implemented, or that many more people are just going to be that much more angry, where they have time to adjust to it. But Stan and I have discussed that if that's an area that the board would like to go, then we need to ask your permission to start having those meetings as early as August. Because we've got to start, we got to take the summer, we got to start looking at what's best to kind of equally balance our schools in the Columbia area. And then we've got to create those maps. We got to have those maps printed. We got to post those maps, and we got to start having community meetings around the entire district to start to inform people and get feedback on, do the maps change? Do we shift here? Do we shift there? What do you think? Give us your feedback. That's going to be a lot of meetings. We're looking at least one meeting per school in the Columbia area, in addition to multiple community meetings between now and then. Could run upwards in over a 6-month period of upward to 20 to 30 meetings, face-to-face meetings. So we have to, if we're going to do that, we've got to start that process now. It's got to begin.
And we want to make sure as we do that, there's some additional growth that has shown up even since Dr. Register did his report. There's 2 new apartment complexes in Columbia, for instance. One which is under construction. The other one has been past the Planning Commission, but I don't know that they've started any work on it. The total of those are 1,000 units, and that's all zoned for Brown Elementary School. And according to the figures he gave us, that would mean about an additional 140 students at Brown out of that apartment. Now, that may not happen for 5 more years, so those get full. There's a new development that was just announced on Monsanto Road, which is upwards, when it gets finished, of 24, what was the number, 1,200 homes? 1,200 homes. 1,200 homes, which would be zoned for Baker Elementary School the way it currently is. Now, it could, that those things could be changed as well. So we need to roll those into the mix as we start. And so we would need a little bit of time to gather all that information, put all that out. We've talked about bringing folks from the attendance department, facilities department, transportation department together to kind of work on that plan to see what we could do.
And that's at this point. We don't know what's going to happen 6 months from now. If there's interest for these properties that are coming zone to Brown, and the properties that are, if there's an interest on Monsanto Road, there are going to be more. And I know what's going to happen. We're going to get a plan that looks good, and then Tony Massey's going to call us and go, hey, we got another 1,500 home coming in. We've just been approved, and that's what's going to happen. But we need to start now to prepare for that.
I don't think anybody wants to do it. But I just think the reality is we're going to have to.
I looked at, hey, we could be going the other way. I could be having to lay people off and close buildings. This could be a lot worse. So while this is for us, it's like, here comes another home. That's a good thing for the school system and for the county. So these are frustrating, but it's good. It's a good kind of frustrating.
And to go with that too, and again, I had a developer approach me a couple of weeks ago about the property exactly to the south of the Malin Moore property.
Yeah.
I think he may have already closed and purchased that, and he's looking at putting homes there as well.
Yeah.
So, we're right back to, the change is gonna happen, but I just think we have to start looking at this and addressing that. And the one more thing I'll go back to, I know I skipped ahead since I took us past 7 o'clock. Yes. As far as what we've got here on the McDowell, I still have a problem with the 500 student school and trying to cram a design we're only going to use once onto that piece of property.
Yeah.
Again, when I'm looking at growth issues, that doesn't, to me, address any of the growth issues. We're just building a school and basically keeping it where it was. And that was the same problem I had with the 800 student combination of
Mm-hmm.
Baker and McDowell. It really doesn't move the needle to plan ahead for that. So that's where I've struggled with both of those.
All right, so it looks like we may have a quorum now, but, and now we talked about before that we were going to try to go till 7 and just do this as a work session. Let me get some input and feedback. Do we just wrap up the work session, maybe go a little bit longer with the work session? do we want to now go into committee and try to continue on and maybe try to get some work done tonight? What's everybody's thoughts? So let's maybe kind of go around the room. Put everybody on the spot.
I'm not on the committee, so.
You're on the work session.
Yeah, I'm fine with whatever.
So let's start all over first. Yeah, have a regular meeting first.
I'm kinda in the way with him, since he's got some more issues up there, he's gonna work out. Let me have some updates.
Ms. Parker's just walked in and he's proposed something I'm really interested in what you said
Which part?
about looking at the growth and the middle school moving. I mean, she didn't hear that, and,
Well, I can talk some more.
but you can tell her.
Well, what about if we continue the work session till 7:30? That way we can still continue on with some of these discussions, and then we'll just, again,
But I'd rather, so I'll go until 9 o'clock tonight. I want to get this stuff done. If I came in for it, I wouldn't have come if we were just gonna do another work session, to be completely honest. I thought you needed 4
yeah.
so, sorry.
I can keep talking whether it's a work session or a meeting.
I mean, if she's on the committee and she went to this effort, I think,
Well,
I wouldn't, I wouldn't have come in.
well, and that's where I appreciate the effort that you put forward. So, I mean, if we want to,
I'd rather get this to the full board for us to be able to vote on it the sooner the better, is personally how I feel.
I'll tell you what, why don't we do this? Why don't we're gonna continue on with the work session till 7:30, and then we'll see where we're at. If it looks like, hey, we're making some progress here, and we wanna go ahead and go into committee and get some work done, we'll do that. If not, if we think, oh, no, this is gonna take a lot more time, then we can go around the room again to see what everybody wants to do. How about that? So we'll go till 7:30.
Sounds good. And I
Yeah.
think we'll be able to make some, I think that could work for me personally. Ms. Parker, would you like me to start over? Okay. Okay.
See, you just missed the good part. We're really getting to the
Yeah.
good part, so, yeah.
Basically, and I'll give you the kind of little bit of the short version. My driving force in looking at this is looking at is addressing the growth issues. And we had just got through talking about how, for example, Spring Hill Middle School was over on year 2, but based on some of the information that Stan and Chris were talking about this evening, that I believe if I'm understanding, did Stan leave? If I'm understanding correctly, you guys may feel like that maybe should be a year 1 request. Would that be a fair assessment of what you're saying? Okay, so I think, but the reality of that is, and I think that's what David was saying, was that means either we really pushes up how much we're having to ask for as far as funding, or it means some things have to get moved around. I laid out kind of my personal view of that, and again, no offense to anyone, I just got the ball rolling with where I saw things. Anyone is free to, but I was basically, if you skip over to addendum 1 page, essentially what I did was I moved McDowell Elementary School to year 2. I moved, I'm on hold personally on Mount Pleasant Middle School's K-8 program until I get an explanation of why that is necessary at all right now. We did get a new number, by the way, for Spring Hill Elementary School. It's now $25,850,000 based on some new information. Moving Spring Hill Middle School over to year 1, and then my opinion was to kind of dissect the Spring Hill High School addition down to just the bare minimum of parking and whatever is necessary to make sure we can seat the kids. There's some things in there that, although they are nice to bring it up to be on kind of on par with Central High School, I don't feel like those are year 1 necessary items. That was where I'm at on that. And then also that we need to be looking at a countywide rezone at the same time to address this. One of the facts that came up a minute ago was about that Spring Hill Middle School is currently at 905 students with a capacity of 1,000, and they think they can make a little more room, but even that would get, and we're growing at 100 students a year on average there. So even if we just took in the 100, we'd be pretty much sitting at capacity at that school, which was kind of my reason for wanting to go ahead and do that right now. And then also said that I'm not in favor of 500 student school at McDowell. Did I cover it all again?
Yeah.
Man, why'd you take so long the first time?
Well, and to follow up with some of the thought processes that David was talking about, I mean, I guess for me, I kind of go back to Carrie, kind of your profession of like a nurse having a triage. You know, I mean, you've got all these needs as somebody comes through the door, and you want to try to do everything. They may have a broke bone. You want to hurry up and fix that, but they may be also complaining of heart issues. And my understanding, I guess, the triage process is kind of prioritizing. Okay, heart goes up. We try to work on that first because that's a death, life or death situation. The broken bone, yeah, we got to address that, but that's going to move further down. And that's where I guess in some ways I kind of see kind of what David was talking about as far as like the growth and trying to get ahead of that. It almost seems like if Spring Hill Middle is about ready to reach capacity, and we could end up in the same situation we've had to deal with Marvin Wright and having to do the addition. It almost seems like maybe that needs to be moved over into the urgent things that we need to try to address, and maybe some of these other things maybe do. It's not that we're forgetting about them. Yes, we're still triaging, but this is more a broken bone that we were going to work on maybe after we try to get ahead of things. And I guess in some ways, I kind of think about with the growth, if we could get ahead of that, if we could move that where we're not just reacting all the time, if we get ahead of that curve a little bit, that may give us some breathing room so that we can then accomplish some of these other things that we need to be addressing, like McDowell or Mount Pleasant Elementary School or some of these other things that are still real needs, but we've given ourselves breathing room to be able to do those in a thoughtful manner. So.
I just saw no lights on. McDowell is not a school those kids need to be in for 2 more years. It is a sick school. So are you going to spend money just to put that off? I hear what he's saying. I was kind of fascinated by it. I'm not opposed to it. But then I have to go back to those kids in that school. That is a sick school. And so, okay, you've allocated money in EMG to do the repairs to McDowell. I don't think that'd be just throwing money. It'd be putting a Band-Aid on open heart surgery, if the analogy. So I understand wanting to get ahead of the growth, and I think that's really something we need to consider, but I do think the safety and well-being of the kids in their school is of paramount importance. So what about that?
I think it's admirable to try to plan for growth. I don't know at this point that we are going to be able to get ahead of it, because I think it's coming to Columbia just like it's coming to Spring Hill, just like it's coming to Mount Pleasant, just like it's coming to Culleoka. I mean, that floodgate is about to explode, hopefully, in a good way. But I struggle with just putting all our eggs in one basket. As far as just trying to address the growth in Spring Hill, because we're planning for the future on the dime of the people who are living here. And they're going to schools that are subpar. And Dr. Register said that. He said that we didn't need to have kids in McDowell. So maybe we need to look at opening this school back up. Maybe we need to look at sending kids to Highland and sending kids to Riverside and dividing that up while we figure out what we're going to do about addressing the condition of McDowell. But I don't know. That's for somebody makes much more money at this than I do. But I'm not real comfortable with where we're prioritizing some of this money, especially the addition in Spring Hill seems like an absolute waste to me. The parking there, I am totally in favor of. They definitely need that, but the rest of it, I can problem solve that all day long. So I don't agree with any of that. What about with the addition at Wright? I mean, are we still going to be busting at the seams as far as elementary school goes at Spring Hill Elementary and whatnot?
As far as you're talking about in
In that
what
area.
kind of timeline?
Next year?
Well, next year, once we add to Marvin Wright, we have capacity to be adequately for next year, probably the next couple of years. We've always felt like, but in the third year, you start running out of space again there
Okay.
for your elementary schools, especially with the new growth that's projected on the Spring Hill Elementary side of things. So, yeah, it still looks like with all that's coming, and I'd have to go back and look at it. The numbers are here, but
I'm just saying, would you prioritize the middle school over the elementary school at this point, or elementary and then the middle?
I can't answer
Pick
that
your
without going,
poison.
I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. I think they're both needed. Dr. Register prioritized the elementary school over the middle school.
Right.
But he said the middle school was quickly behind that because he recommended it in year 2. He recommended the elementary in year 1 and the middle, as far as beginning the process in the middle school in year 2. So I think he agreed they were both pretty important.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I really appreciate your brainstorming, your creativity, your insight also about Spring Hill High School. It does sound like maybe some of that, but not all of it's needed, but I am going to continue to advocate for a new McDowell. And while I probably wouldn't have chosen a 500-kid school, my understanding is that that's all that land can house. But I do feel like for the demographic of that school, as well as the culture of Columbia, that's an important school for us to keep. And I'd like it to be as big as we can make it on that site, but I do think there's growth coming to Columbia. So I agree, those kids really shouldn't stay in that building for one day longer than we absolutely have to. So, but I appreciate that we're having a work session, that we're able to just informally keep brainstorming and kind of going at the grind and kind of weighing out our priorities on this, because we are only going to have so much money. But I really, really would like to see us proactive instead of reactive, and I think that's why this is a fruitful conversation, that we are talking about the growth for the middle school. For once, we're actually like looking ahead, we're planning, and I hope that we are moving to a much more proactive mentality. But there are things here for safety. I just don't think those kids can be in that building any longer.
Okay. And let me clarify on that. And I've been saying for a while that something needs to happen with McDowell. So I think we're all in agreement with that. I'm simply in triage mode. I'm trying to figure out solutions to make it happen. Because the reality is, to make all of these pieces work, if you start looking at what was originally $50 million requested on year 1, you move the middle school over, plus a little bit extra on there, we're looking at now $82 million for year 1. If we keep McDowell on year 1, kind of just, no, actually I take that back, 74-ish, because I was cutting off Spring Hill High School edition, so knock that one out of there. That's just where I'm again, no judgment on that, but these are some big numbers. That's what I've been trying to struggle with, is how do we make all of this fit? Yeah. So that's where I'm at, is trying to, how do we make all these pieces work? And that's one of the things that probably one of the reasons I moved McDowell to year 2, to be honest, was that I don't like the solutions that are in front of us. I don't like the 500-student school. And that's just where I'm at. So that would be where my inclination was, to give us some more time to find a different solution for that. And that different solution could be, again, some of the ones we've already looked at. That could be a new piece of property somewhere else. I think we could brainstorm through a whole lot of other options there. Again, I want to be clear. The reality is, whether it gets done this year or next year, something needs to be done. So I'm not putting it. This is in no way is something that can be put off indefinitely. This has to be done. Something. I I push it to year 2 simply because I didn't like what was in front of us as far as the solutions right now. So that's where I'm coming from.
Spring Hill Middle School, do we know the numbers of kids in 8th grade that are moving up to the high school and the numbers of the feeder schools, 5th grade that's coming in? Do we have those numbers?
I actually was in a conversation with Ms. Massey at Hardwright today, and when she and I estimated, we talked about, I think it was about 250 students that we estimated today, but I don't know those numbers exactly. We could get those.
Because we may be in worse shape than we think, or we may be in better shape than we think. If we
'Cause-
have more kids that are leaving than coming in to the middle school,
Yeah, because the 3 feeder schools for Spring Hill Middle are Spring Hill Elementary, Marvin Wright, and Howell. And I think between the 3 of those, it was 250 students.
and do you know what their 8th grade class is?
No, I don't, but I can probably get that pretty quickly.
Okay.
If you'll let me shut off my computer so you just won't see all my frantic searching here. Freeze. Okay, thank you. I learned how to drive the projector.
Does that mean that we're potentially looking at going back on our promise to those people that we moved from Wright to Howell, that they would definitely be going to Spring Hill Middle? I mean, is that factored in?
We haven't addressed that. I mean, that's not a lot of students. I think
Okay.
that's, I think that's about 50,
Okay.
but.
My reason for asking that had nothing to do with that.
Oh, no, I just thought about
okay.
that because that was kind of one of the
Right.
carrots that got
Now,
dangled,
I just
guess.
wanted to see where we, because like I said, we may be better off than we thought we would be, or we may be worse. We may be at capacity without the hundreds new students that we're talking about.
And another thing, just to kind of jog my memory, Dr. Register had talked about the expansion at Spring Hill to delay the need to start to build the high school at Malin Moore. So if we don't want to do the addition at Spring Hill, we need to move up the timeline for the high school at Malin Moore. So that means we could be moving up the timeline for 3 schools on the property to be sooner.
2 things on that. I mean, it's my understanding that the addition we're talking about here is not adding any kind of classroom capacity. We're only doing core capacity on that. While I think an addition to the library / media section is nice, I think the new auditorium would be nice. I don't think they're critical to be able to serve the number of the 1,500 students that we're talking about. Now, to go to 1,900, I think that may start changing the thing, but I don't think we, as a board, have even agreed that we want to go to 1,900 at that school, to be honest.
Yeah,
So,
but to do the cafeteria, then you have to do the auditorium, because the cafeteria's got to be taken out, or the auditorium's got to be taken out to expand the cafeteria.
that was only if you add the culinary cafeteria.
No, we have to expand the eating area, which means we have to go into the auditorium.
You can't go forward? Pretty sure you can.
Forward where?
Towards 31.
Start
Towards
building
31.
start building towards the front of the, towards the road? Is that possible?
It is possible we might not achieve all the savings because the idea was that you were gonna, not rebuild the total new space for the cafeteria, but use that auditorium. So I'm not, I'm saying that wouldn't be, obviously you wouldn't build a new auditorium so you'd have all those savings, but it might, the cost that we were doing for a cafeteria would go up, obviously. We also need a bigger kitchen, the serving area in the kitchen, and the kitchen itself being able to provide. It's a very, very small kitchen. If you compared it to the one we just built at Central, it's probably a third the size.
And I'd appreciate the comparison on that. I guess I'm looking at, again, this is triage. There's things I would like to do, and then there's things that we may have to choose to do. Because, again, if we do that full addition, my $75 million number now goes back up, because I took $6.5 million off of there. I'm making numbers up, by the way, just letting y'all know. So now we're back up over, these are rough estimates from my extensive contracting experience. Now we're back up over 80 million, David. Are you okay? But that's I say these numbers because that's the reality of what again, when I said I'm trying to make these pieces fit, that's what I'm trying to struggle with, is how do we make this work? because this number starts making me sweat after a while. But again, I know that, but I'm just trying to figure out other ways to do this that we can actually get done. Because at some point, there's going to reach a point where we cannot get funding for all of this, and we're going to have to, whether we want to or not, triage this down to what we do get funding for. If they don't go for, I mean, you're right, we could come in here and ask for all 3 schools at the Malin Moore property. That's over $100 million by itself. Doesn't mean we're going to get it. So we could ask for all we want, and we could try our best to justify those needs. But at the end of the day, we may have to figure out how to get by without it. And I'm just trying to make sure we're not wasting our time kind of shooting for the moon on everything we would love to have, which is honestly pretty much all of year 1 and 2, to be honest, should be asked for. If we're really kind of being honest about these things, we should be asking for them right now. I just don't think we can. And I think people would pass out if they saw those numbers.
But I think it also, while the numbers are difficult for us to wrap our minds around, at the end of the day, I think what has to be our guiding factor is, what do we need to do? I mean, to take care of our students, to take care of our school system. When I look at this, I think the Spring Hill Elementary, that's one that we have to do, no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, I'm still uncomfortable on the amount, but I think that's something we don't have a choice. We've got to do that. The more I'm hearing about Spring Hill Middle, if we are already over 900 right now, and we're adding about 100 students every year, that means we're at least at 100% capacity when school starts this year. And so we're going to be right in the exact same situation where we're dealing with Marvin Wright. We're going to end up, if we do not have a school built as quickly as possible, there's going to be kids out on the street. And that's like, we don't have any choice. So the more, unless we could, and I understand, the whole thing with how, rezoning, I don't know whether we can we say, maybe if we do some rezoning, if that's where some of those students are going to Spring Hill Middle, I don't know if we could buy some time. I don't know. But it almost appears to me that a thing that we just have to almost is to put the Spring Hill Middle in column 1. And so then the next question for me is McDowell, and I agree as well with everybody that that's a need. And it may be that we collectively decide that is just as much of a critical, maybe that is a heart condition just as much as these other conditions. I mean, that may be what we decide, and if that's what we decide, then we've got to put that on column 1. Now, again, we may then be triaging all of our county commissioners over there but if we know that that's a need, that's what we've got to present almost. We've just got to tell them, look, we don't like these numbers any more than anybody else, but look, we've got a job to try to do planning, to try to deal with the growth, and also to deal with other facilities that may not be up to standard. And we hate asking for that, but that is what we as a collective body has determined in our best judgment based upon our information, that this is a fundamental need. So I guess to me, that's kind of, almost seems like, and I don't want to get ahead too much, but that may be kind of one of the main decisions that we have to do, is figure out whether McDowell stays in column 1 or maybe column 2, if everybody thinks likewise that Spring Hill Middle also ought to be in column 1. And again, maybe not, that's not what everybody thinks. So, Mr. Atkinson, Mr. Parker, or.
No, you're first.
Okay. I agree with you on the middle school, Spring Hill. Yeah, it probably does need to be going put in year 1. McDowell, if we don't put it in year 1, we're gonna have to turn around and spend that EMG money now to keep the school up, which is how much, $3 million some dollars? About $4 million. So to me, that'll be wasting more money if we can go on and build the school earlier and not spend that $4 million on redoing McDowell. Just put it in towards rebuilding McDowell. So either way, you're gonna have to either spend $4 million to upkeep McDowell as it is and put it in year 2 or 3, whatever it is, it'd be wasting money to me.
And I think that's definitely a valid point for us to take a look at. I think some of our understanding has changed a little bit, where initially we did budget $4 million for plumbing work, electrical work, also some HVAC work, I think, at McDowell. And those were preliminary numbers that EMG gave us. We've since, I think in looking at what really does need to be done on plumbing, I think we've already bid that out.
Yeah, I can give you that number.
And then I think they looked at the electrical. We still have some HVAC work there, is that right,
Yeah.
Mr. Breeden? And so that's still over $1 million.
Yeah, probably $1.5 million.
Right. So it's still, I think it's still, still a factor, though, of, we're potentially putting in that much money into a school if we put these things off, so.
And I would just say to, you wouldn't improve the look of the walls or the floors we could probably improve the air quality, which is a big issue with the new HVAC system, but at minimum, you would have to do a new HVAC system. Probably need to do a little bit of work on the supply side of the plumbing in spots, but you're not talking about significant money. But other things like windows and soffit, brick repointing, things that, that just need to be done to an old building could probably be put off, but you probably need to spend at least $2 million if you're going to stay in that building for any length of time. That would probably make the air quality better. A new HVAC system would probably make the air, which is a big issue in that building because you have poor air quality. Probably wouldn't deal much else with the condition of the building. One other issue is we'd have to decide if we wanted to address the elevator issue or not. Right now we have a real struggle with the lift. It was down the other day. Of course, we have students who have to use that, who are assigned to the second floor. They have to carry them up and down the steps when that happens, because there's no way to get them up and down the steps. Students are wheelchair bound.
Kristen?
I guess my only question is, with regards to Dr. Register's report, where do we stand on that? Because when I go back and I look at his first thing was that we would combine the schools, and we seem to have kind of veered away from that. What's our basis for veering away from the combination? That was kind of like the gold standard for a year, and now we've kind of moved back, and I'm just not real clear on why that happened.
And I'll let Dr. Marzak jump in if he wants to. I think a lot of it was in response to the thought exchange information that was gathered, and probably some more things. That's why I thought I'd let you jump in.
Yeah, so we looked at the thought exchange with the two responses of they wanted separate schools, and they wanted to renovate Baker and rebuild McDowell. And then also we were looking at some of the growth patterns that were coming to Baker. We would have had to go over 800 students if we were to combine the two schools together with what's coming to Baker down the road. So when
if
we
you don't rezone to other schools.
that's
You've
if we do
got-
if that's
you've
if
got
we
room at Highland, you've got
Yeah.
room at Riverside, you've got room at Woodard, you've got room all
Yeah.
around. So I understand where David's coming from, because the whole 500 at McDowell, it bothers me, honestly, because when we set that policy, that was like the low end, and I really don't think that we were wanting to go at the low end, and all of a sudden it was like, we met with them and we said, can you make it 500, which tells me it really is not going to be 500. I mean, if we are at 500 there, we're going to be at capacity overflowing potentially.
They originally gave us a recommendation of 480.
Right.
And we asked if we could, they said they thought so. It has to do with the site, size of the site. It also has a lot to do with the roads
Access
around,
roads.
the access roads.
Gotcha.
But it's a combination of those two things. But, I mean, we have 7.5 acres. We've always said for a 700-student elementary school, we need 15. So it would be a tight site at 500.
Has there been any exploration on some of the new subdivisions in Columbia that are supposedly going in, talking to them about doing a neighborhood school or anything like that? Okay.
Okay. That was some good stuff on that, by the way. and I don't want to reiterate too, even though I threw out some ideas about moving it to year 2, I am fully, if we decide as a board that we need to put that on year 1, you guys know, I'm all for it. I will support it 100%, because if we agree that that's what we need to do, that's what we need to do. I guess, as Ms. Parker was saying, I wish we had some more options to look at on those, such as, and I will be perfectly honest, I get completely emotionally unattached to these things, so I look at them pretty analytically on that. So I have no emotional attachment to McDowell as a school. Even the schools that my kids go to, I don't have any attachment to. So I tend to look at it just from numbers and what other options there are. So I would look at things like other property or spreading those kids out or what works. And I kind of question, too, how we moved away from that initial look, even though I understand that it would put it up to 800 and that was kind of the top range. But to me, if we're going to be, because right now we're talking, there's 2 options there. One of them is the bottom of our range, and the other one is the top of our range. It seems to me I would almost rather go towards the top of the range in this instance, because again, when I like I told you guys, I'm moving towards handling growth, and at least that starts to, when you spread kids out, it actually does create a little more room in that thinking, and in essence gets rid of 2 older schools and puts us in 1 new one. So that puts us ahead as far as I'm concerned on the maintenance issue and upkeep. That kind of resets the clock on all those things, which to me looks like money that we would be able to then utilize. Instead of doing maintenance on those 2 schools, we'd be able to utilize that money back into, on the upcoming years, to be able to put that into all these other issues that we've got, maintenance in other schools, additional growth. I kind of wish we had seen some more options on those.
Well, that's just our recommendation. If you guys don't like the recommendation, you can vote it down and then ask us to bring back a different recommendation. So we can do that. It's just a recommendation.
You make it sound so simple.
Sorry.
Well, and another thing, we've got to also look at the big picture as well. The original estimate for combining Baker and McDowell was $29 million. Okay, so what we're looking at right now, tentatively, to rebuild a 500-unit school would be around 17.6. So we're talking about what? So that's another $12 million. And then 2, I mean, we're talking about trying to get ahead of the growth. If you rebuild an 800 school, you took 2 400 schools, you put them together, we didn't put anything on the shelf. We didn't gain anything from that. At least if we spend 17.6, we've added another 100 to our capacity. I mean, we've got a capacity of around 400 at McDowell right now. We're bumping that up. So we're actually gaining some ground. So, what's that? What are you talking about with Baker? Well, and that's if you think that Baker needs to be, replaced as well. From my perspective, when I looked at it, I mean, it seems to be a pretty decent building. I mean, yes, it needs some upkeep, it needs some improvements, but for me, from my perspective, that would be a very big waste of money to take a perfectly good building and demolish it just to build a larger school. So I guess for me, I can't wrap my mind out of spending more money to try to, that does not accomplish anything. That's where I'm having, difficulty with that whole thought process. I don't really understand where Dr. Rescher was coming from to begin with, to be recommending to build an 800-unit school when the capacity numbers were showing that both Baker and McDowell were going to be over capacity in 5 to 10 years.
That was a recommendation of central office a year ago. So Dr. Register didn't just go out on a limb and say, let's combine these 2 schools. I mean,
But
saw that on the plan that.
But whatever recommendation we look at, we've got to look at, does it make sense for us? I mean, we got to analyze the merits.
Experts at some point thought that it made sense, David. Central office thought it made sense
And that's all good. And that may be from your perspective, it may be, okay, that's what they recommend and that's what I'm going to do. For me, somebody can make a recommendation and it's just my nature to analyze it and to see what it's based upon. I mean, that's the same thing with the EMG report. You know, I've seen some of those things. That's great. That's a good starting point. I've got to dig into it. I've got to see what the recommendation is based upon. Does it have legs? Does it have something to stand on? And again, when I look at the Baker McDowell combining and we actually don't gain any more capacity, we're going to be spending $30 million. That doesn't equate for me. So.
This may be very naive, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask for the things that we know are necessary the first year. So if we feel like an elementary school, a middle school, and whatever we decide to do there are necessary, absolutely necessary for Murray County, then I think we ask for it, but I also think we have a plan B if we don't get it. That would be the way I approach it.
Okay, I have a couple questions, and I was going to get down to some just hard facts on that. Can somebody give refresh me on the Spring Hill Elementary, the new school we're building? What was the completion timeline on that? Ballpark, just ballpark number.
New elementary school will be open August 2019.
All right. And again, I'm not going to hold anybody to any of these. If we were to do the middle school, what would be again,
Speaking with
ballpark?
Mr. Hewlett tonight, he felt like if we got funding in this year's budget, we could make that same timeline.
Okay. The Spring Hill High School addition as was planned there, what was the timeline on that?
We would be talking about that probably somewhere during the 2018-19 school year would be completed. May not make the beginning of school 2018, but probably would have it completed before.
And you
school
felt
was
like
out.
that could be, I'm assuming parking we've done almost immediately.
Yeah,
and
we
the
would
rest
want
of
to,
it
as soon as we
kind
can
of
start
work
that.
around the school year.
Yeah,
We
we'd want to
shouldn't-
start the parking.
Shouldn't mess up the school year, that you feel like
Right.
that can be done kind of like you've done Central, work around things, okay. And then McDowell, what would be a timeline on that?
It would be the same thing, 2019 school year. Wow. Again, considering that funding came in this year.
Sure, understood. So is that something that and again, we've talked about this in the past, that's a lot of projects going on. Is that something that we can handle? 'Cause, I mean, it seems to me like that's finding a lot of people to do a whole lot of work.
Again, I think we could handle those if we did them under the model that we're working now, where, assuming they have the capacity to do it, manage it. Now, if we had to go
He's
through,
gonna say yes.
if we had to go through those and individually bid them
Okay.
through out of our office, we couldn't do that many
Again, I'm
projects
just
at
trying to be
one time.
realistic, make sure that's something that we can handle, taking those on.
If I may.
Sure.
Before Jamie came to work with me, I had over $150 million in force at one time in 3 different counties. And without Jamie's help, I handled it just fine.
All right.
And I'm glad he's not here again, so I can say, I'll find out if somebody tells on me.
Okay, one more, Chris, and again, I'll go back to, I'll go back to the Spring Hill High School. Can you guys, or have you guys talked about any way to pare that down? And I understand the vision, and I agree with that being long-term would be what to shoot for, but just with what I'm looking at here, I'm just not sure I can make that fit with McDowell, with the 2 other schools.
Here's a
and-
better question. How much do you want to shave out? How much money, how many millions do you want to shave out? What are you looking
I
at?
want to get just the needs.
Well, if you're asking how much you can shave out, then obviously there's stuff you feel like is fluff.
Well,
I would
it's-
go for the
it's-
approach
it's
of
not
the
fluff,
needs.
but we can stretch. We can stretch if we need
Well,
to.
for example, I think Ms. Parker brought up the parking. I think that's a need at this point.
Yeah.
I would just like to know what other parts of that would you consider to be needs that just can't be put off?
if we're talking about things that can't be put off, I think the cafeteria setting and the auditorium, I think that's a need. We could probably stretch the classrooms, but we need to accelerate the timeline on the new high school. That needs to come online sooner by not adding in the extra wing.
I didn't think a wing was included in this, was it?
That's going to be,
That wasn't in this first phase, but,
You're scaring me now.
yeah, it did not include, this first phase did not include.
when were the classrooms? What year was that?
That was in 5 years.
Okay, that was in 5 years. I don't think we need to do the library. I think we can hold off on the library.
Okay.
Or library. I think that one's, I don't think that one needs to happen. I think we're okay with that. But I think the other stuff needs to happen.
So you're talking about getting it down to, instead of 8.7 million, 8 million? 8.6?
Yeah,
I still struggle with that.
I understand.
I struggle with the auditorium being a need.
I understand.
Just personally, that's just my opinion. I may be wrong. I'm okay with that, but I struggle with that.
Mhm.
And I struggle with the culinary cafeteria.
So maybe a different way of asking it. So what is the cost of just the core, if we did the cafeteria and the parking lot? Is that the kind of the, seems to be like the core things? What would that be?
If you don't want to go into the auditorium, leave the auditorium and try to build forward and try to expand, like maybe wrap like an L shape around the cafeteria. I think expanding the kitchen, that's a need. Seating space for the cafeteria, that's a need. I see the auditorium as a need, but because it was programmed for a different time. When they had middle school students, it was programmed for a smaller school. If it grows to the size that it grows, it's less than a quarter of the kids can fit in there at one time.
yeah,
But-
one class would not be able to fit in there.
Yeah. So it's
And again, I think we all agree it's something that needs to happen. This year is where I'm struggling with it. Does it
Okay.
need to happen this year? I guess that's where I'm at. Because there's some things I think we need to have happen this year. That's what we're trying to pare this down to, is the things that we've got to do this year. I just struggle with, is that auditorium something that has to happen this year? That's where I'm at. And I see other heads nodding.
it's a domino effect. If you build around the auditorium and do an L-shaped seating area, then you can leave the auditorium. Then it's not a problem. It's fine. But then I recommend that we not go back at any time and take out that and build another auditorium, because you've already spent the money to build around it on the outside, to build more towards the front of the building to expand out. So that project could just be taken out altogether.
How much more seating were we going to add with the cafeteria area?
I don't know that number exactly, but I think it's about double the space that we have now. Because we're very limited now. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
been there. Yeah, you have. You're familiar with what's happening in the cafeteria now. So we were talking about just about doubling the capacity of the cafeteria. And the ultimate goal with all of these was to add this classroom addition in 5 years so that this infrastructure would meet that size as well as this size, that ultimately take it to an 1,800 student high school. Probably if you don't do those things, you probably limited it to a 1,500 student high school. You know, we could expand the cafeteria seating space enough to accommodate 1,500 students. We could add the parking to do 1,500 students, which means we'd need a new high school in probably 5 years.
And that's where I would probably be anyway, to be honest. Limiting that school to be very similar in size. I think, what is it, Central is 1,600 is where we're at?
Well, Dr. Register on his analysis said it could house 1,800 as
Okay.
well. That was his analysis of the space there. And that's consistent with what Hewlett Spencer's told us. The 1,600 came from SSOE. They actually said, I think they probably house 2,000 students at Central High School, the way it's built. Isn't that what Dr. Oimby said in his analysis?
Are you talking about
Columbia Central.
High School? SSOE gave you a number in the teens,
1,600, yes, sir.
but Dr. Owenby did his calculation on it, and you actually have about a 2,400 student school. Not cramming people in and overlapping, but scheduling. Scheduling is the key. And so that's a lot.
Well, and I appreciate that. On the numbers, though, I think from what I've, in talking with Mr. White and that school, it seems like that would be too much for that school to handle to even go much above 1,600, from what I've been told. Now, that's not my experience, but they said functionally to make that school not get to be kind of out of hand, getting much bigger than that. And again, personally, that's where we started setting those limits on the size of schools. Was I think we were trying to stay away from getting too much bigger than that, I believe.
Yeah, the things that Central High School would have that Spring Hill High School doesn't have, it has much more hallway corridor space, much larger corridors, which is much larger stairwells. That's one of the things that is a real struggle at Spring Hill High School is stairwell size. What we would do, we've already talked about with the classroom addition, we'd do some connecting corridors that the students wouldn't flow through the main hallways and through the stairwells and spread out the flow of students some, because that's a real issue there. The seating capacity of the cafeteria and the seating capacity, Central High School new auditorium seats 900 students. And that one there seats 350, I think is what it is. So.
Well, I guess to get down to, and this, we're still in just talking about this. If they say they can make these things happen, I'm still, does anybody want to really talk about the Mount Pleasant K-8 edition? Because I still don't understand that one on year one.
And again, I think with both it and Baker were similar, that the recommendation was not based on the current condition of the schools, but how much you would spend on them in the next 10 years.
Well, I think
there's a certain amount of money you got to spend now, but there's a certain amount of money you got to spend in 2 years, and in 3 years, and in 10 years. If you build a new school, you basically won't spend much of anything on it for 20. So does it make more sense to spend the money now, or over the next 10 years, spend as much as you could have almost built a new school for?
I guess
and that's kind of what
that one
the
brings up my
recommendation
next
was.
question, which was I'm back to the facilities condition index, and like I've said, when we talk about the new construction numbers we've got, as well as the changes we've got to the maintenance and the EMG report numbers of the large plumbing estimates we had that are not being realized. Have we reevaluated that facilities condition index? Because I think that's going to be, I still say looking at that, you're changing both ends of that number. That's going to radically change that facilities condition index for all of those buildings. And I think we would kind of be remiss if we didn't go back and look at that and how that kind of shuffled these buildings around.
And we can do that. We're working on it.
Okay, we're working on it. Good. I would be interested, again, then I'm okay if we agree that McDowell needs to be year one. I'm fine with that. I still would like to see a lesser version of the Spring Hill High School, a number that's smaller than what it is, and just what we need on that. And I'd still like to see Mount Pleasant, the K through 8. I'm not sure about that one moved out, but again, that puts our numbers somewhere around $75, $78 million of what we're talking about asking for this first year. I don't know what everybody else's thoughts of that is.
Well, again, I guess what I go back to is what needs, absolutely, we don't have any choices but to put in column one. And just from the information I'm getting, I think that the Spring Hill Elementary and the Spring Hill Middle have to be in column one. And so the question for me is what stays in column one? Does McDowell stay in column one? Does Mount Pleasant Elementary stay in column one? And does this high school addition stay in column one? And I'm open for input. I'm struggling with this myself, so I'm eager to hear from other members. Ms. Princy.
Regarding Mount Pleasant Elementary, what would have to be done there in year one to move it to year 2 or 3?
You're talking about immediate need kind of things. Let me look at the report. Of course, at Mount Pleasant Elementary, quite frankly, we had already started down the path of not thinking about replacement. So we replaced the boiler there, for instance.
Right.
But it probably at some point will need some additional HVAC. There's some additional HVAC work, some air handlers that need to be replaced. There's some pumps that need to be replaced there.
Is that year one? Is
That's in the
year
DMG.
one?
Yeah, that's in the year one list. There's also some structural issues. We have not got back a structural report on it. We don't know what the cost will be, but we know there's some significant cracks in the building on one end of the building. Dave, you remember that one end? We've actually had chunks of the wall fall out because we've had significant settling going on there, so we need to get some report on there. There's some floor tile that needs to be replaced. I mean, if you've been in the cafeteria, you know
Right.
what kind of shape the floor tile is in there. That needs to be done. So it's some of those sort of things that we would need to address pretty quickly.
But in actuality, you're not really going to address that in year one, because we're looking to fund planning for it.
Well,
So it
yeah,
would be
yeah,
year
the-
two or
the-
three at least before we decided what to do with the school. and
Yeah,
buildings.
actually, our recommendation was not spend any additional money on the school, but take that money and put it toward building the
Right, I
addition.
understand that, but if we don't have the money to do that,
Would
is
we
there
need to go
anything-
ahead, we would need to go ahead and address some of these other issues, yes. Be our recommendation if we weren't gonna proceed with the addition and moving toward the K-8, that we go ahead and do these repairs to the existing facility.
So you couldn't just put it off for a year?
We could. There's nothing.
That's my
There's
question on some
true,
of these
the
schools
most
that-
critical thing we had was the boiler, and we fixed it.
Okay.
We fixed the boiler, so we saved, so there are some other pieces and parts. I can't say we can't spend $0 on it. There's some things we need to spend some dollars on. School looks pretty rough on the inside. Baseboard's in bad shape. I've got a quote to replace baseboard. We really need, the tile in the cafeteria looks really rough, needs to be replaced. There's some little cosmetic things like that. The settlement, building's not gonna fall down. If we were gonna keep it long-term, we'd wanna fix that. There could be some additional, some of these other HVAC things, they're all functioning, they're not broken. So that they could possibly, we could possibly patch them and get them to hang on for a little while.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
in my opinion, I would, not only Mount Pleasant, but some of these other schools that we're looking at year one for those type of improvements, if we can move those to year two, I would, and do the needs that we know we need first. I think that's what we.
And we
what we
could
have to
certainly do
look at.
everything on the EMG list. Again, go back to EMG did not say these items all need to be replaced. They said based on the age of the building, the age of the equipment, we predict this is when you're gonna need to replace them. Because they didn't just give us what needs to be replaced now, but they projected that out for 25 years. And the whole purpose of that is to show that maintaining a building is never done.
Right.
You can't say, we're gonna spend this X number of $1,000 this year. We won't have to spend any more money for the next 20. No, we're gonna have to spend, and what they showed is we need to spend about $5,000 to $10,000 a year just to keep up the buildings we have. And we hadn't done that for the last several, so they had a big front-end list of kind of catch-up based on, but now some of that stuff still works. It doesn't mean it's broken, and we can probably put some of it off.
But like, so Baker and Mount Pleasant really are not six schools like Howell?
I would not put them in the same.
McDowell, I'm
I would
sorry.
not put them in the same category as McDowell.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Is the $10 million for the addition at Mount Pleasant Middle, is that a Dr. Register number, or is
It
that a
is.
Steve number?
That's a Dr. Register number.
So it's probably closer to 15 million?
It might be a little bit low.
So.
Let's
That's
see.
nothing
Now,
against you,
no,
Steve. I'm just
excuse
like
me.
trying to expound
No,
upon that.
Hang on, I may be telling you
Okay.
wrong. That may be one we went back and adjusted. I think we did adjust it.
Okay, and the only reason why I
Yes.
was asking was because if we did do McDowell and we've been looking at it not being something that we could duplicate somewhere else, could we not potentially duplicate it as Mount Pleasant Elementary School and not do the addition at Mount Pleasant Middle?
There's enough property at Mount Pleasant Elementary School. It's a larger lot. I think
Right.
we go all the way to Kittrell Cars, don't we?
We do, yes, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Well, and I mean, I'm assuming that that McDowell is one of our smaller lots, so I would
it
think
is.
that we can duplicate that plan. I'm just trying to save us
We may be able
money
to,
as far as not having to.
we may
do
be
it
able to
quickly.
duplicate Malin Moore at Mount Pleasant. Because what we're talking about at McDowell is going up,
Right.
building a two-story where Malin Moore is a one-story. We have more property. We could probably do a one-story at Mount Pleasant Elementary.
Dr.
And-
Webster's number was 8,950,000, and we
Okay.
actually have a number of about 11,400. So we did redo the numbers.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I'm
you,
sorry.
you're looking at a 500 student school at McDowell. Mount Pleasant's 600 right now.
Okay.
So we could not use that because it's not big enough.
Well, and that's helpful to know because,
Wow.
again, that goes back to one of the reasons why I struggle with the McDowell is because we're never going to duplicate that plan. And it's not consistent with what you're saying you want to do as far as PBL schools and whatnot. And we got to pay for an elevator and we got to do all that stuff that we're talking about right now as far as what are we going to do for a lift. And I'm sorry, in public schools in the year 2017, not to have an elevator it's embarrassing, I personally think.
It is going to be a PBL school. They're taking the Malin Moore, and instead of it being flat, they're stacking the blocks on top of each other. So the windows will go straight up, and that's just the top ones won't have outside access. But it's still going to be a PBL school. Yeah, you don't want that, kids falling, so.
All right, so I'm gonna jump in real quick. It's 8:00, so I'm gonna do a check. Let me see if we're making progress to see if maybe we have some consensus on some things and see if maybe we can narrow things down to see what we have left. I think, and y'all gonna give me some shaking of the head or nodding the head, everybody, there maybe is a consensus that Spring Hill Elementary needs to be in column 1. All right, Spring Hill Middle in column 1. So there's not maybe a consensus on that, so we may have to come back to that.
I'll just say personally, I feel like we have to ask for it all at this point because next year is gonna be an election year. I don't wanna wait on Mount Pleasant and wait on McDowell and say, oh, maybe we'll get that in the election year. Cause I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch on that one.
All right, so is it,
I'd rather ask for the moon at this point and let them tell us, we're only gonna give you X.
so is there a consensus of including it in the budget proposal for year 1? Did we so? All right. Is anybody on no on that? Because I'm just trying to figure out, where we can try to narrow things down a little bit. It seemed like maybe we're close to a consensus. I don't know. So then we have the remaining things of McDowell. And based upon some of the discussion on that, I think we need some more discussion about whether that's included on column 1 and what is included. And then I think we probably need some more discussion on the Spring Hill High School. What about the Mount Pleasant addition, that funding of possibly moving that into maybe a subsequent year rather than year 1? Is there consensus on that, or is people think that needs to stay in column 1? So maybe holding off on putting that in year 1.
Can I make a statement too?
Sure.
I have had a problem all along because initially we talked about combining the schools. You know how I feel about a campus school. We've all discussed that. So I'm not going to go there. But I also know that if there's room at other schools that you can provide growth in that. And you've got this design of a PBL school that could be placed right there on the Baker property. So I just have a problem with that. But I absolutely would have a huge problem if we don't do something about McDowell, period, whatever that is. It has got to be in column 1. And if it's to replace a school, if that's the will of this board, then so be it. I'm like Mr. Moore, decision of the board, that's where we go. I think that we're not thinking two schools, 2 utility bills, combining them. We talked about initially that would save money in the long run. Would it not?
You're gonna have to go way high on the enrollment, though.
Okay. Well,
Or we're gonna have to also do what Ms. Parker's talking about, is in conjunction rezoning.
Rezoning.
But that would mean that we wouldn't open possibly Baker. So let me do my math here. If we started doing the rezoning, because we did talk about rezoning. And one of the things,
Yes.
if you guys are ready for us, we need to start holding community meetings in August. So if we have a recommendation to the board by December, it's a year out. It's gonna be August of 19. So we could conceivably open combo Baker McDowell and rezone August of 19.
which is
Because
when-
we'd have to.
Yeah.
Because we just can't build, unless you want to build a 1,200 elementary school,
And-
which nobody wants to do that. I'm
No,
with you.
I don't want to do that, but
Yeah.
I'm just saying to you, you're saying what's going to be in column one. First of all, I think you need to ask for all of it. I do. I think commissioners I've talked to are expecting it. I think if we don't ask for some fix at McDowell, they're going to be commissioners saying, well, what in the, you mean you're not going to fix this Columbia school that really needs fixing? Okay, you're, Spring Hill, those commissioners will be really thrilled that we're taking care of them, but the rest of them are gonna say, well, what are you doing about the problems in these places? You accused me of being, not accused me, you said once that I sounded like a politician. We've gotta be politicians. We've got to think, like, you can sell the need for the middle school, you can sell the need for the elementary school, and we can absolutely sell the need to replace some way or another McDowell. So that has to be. So no matter what the decision of the board has, that has to be in column one. You cannot, the thought of those kids even being there another year kind of,
Ms. Bowers.
When it was first proposed that we combine those two schools, it made so much sense to me. Like, oh my word, why would we not? You know, one parking lot, one HVAC, all that. But then we said we want to hear from our community. No one agreed with that. So, you know, if we had just said we're making our decisions, let's move forward, that clearly makes the most sense. But we did seek community involvement, and no one agreed. The commissioners who have reached out do not agree. The community members we've reached out to do not agree. So it was unfortunate. It really makes a lot of sense on paper, but the community does not buy into that. And that's where we are. So with that being said, yes, McDowell gets my vote in year one. I am encouraged to ask for all of it for reasons. But, you know, we may need to go back to a priority list. I think some things could be moved, but I think we should ask for it all. Clearly, McDowell gets my number one vote, and while it may not make the most sense on paper to me, the community shot down the idea of combining, period.
And so, the reason I was wanting that input is, again, it's a little bit after 8 o'clock. We went past the 7:30. I guess the question for me is, do we go ahead and go into committee? Do we think we can go ahead and get something knocked out tonight from a budget standpoint on facilities? And we can have additional committee meetings. We can make amendments, but maybe we can go ahead and put together at least a draft budget to get us going so that we've got something in place. And again, we can always, if we want to make changes, we can do that until it finally gets to the board. And at the board, we can make additional changes. But we've got to get something going. So what is everybody's thoughts? Do they feel like we're at least kind of getting there where we can go ahead and start making some decisions tonight? Or we come back Thursday? We'll just go around the room and get some input.
I don't know that I can come Thursday. So if you
Okay.
need numbers, I'm here tonight.
Okay. Ready to go? Okay. Well, I still want y'all's input because y'all are here. You ready to go?
No,
Let's go ahead and go into committee. Okay. All right. Is that good? All right. All right. Well, let's. Yeah. Excellent idea. So we'll take a break. We'll come back in about let's say 20 after 8, and then we'll go into committee. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and try to come to order.
Two looks more like year three, too.
It starts becoming more manageable.
It's where he said we should be.
Yeah. All right, so I want to welcome everyone to the May 2nd, 2017 Budget Committee meeting of the Maury County School System. First, as far as the roll, if we can go ahead and, do we have somebody that's taking attendance tonight? Oh, you're running the meeting, okay. All right, so if we can just let the minutes reflect that as far as committee members, I am present, Ms. Parker is present, Mr. Moore is present, and Ms. Powers is present, so we do have a quorum. And then we also have board members, Ms. Morency, Mr. Beaver, and Mr. Atkinson. Let's see, and also Ms. Kinzer. All right. All right, so with that, we have a proposed agenda that everyone received. Is there a motion to approve? All right, got a motion by Mr. Moore, second by Ms. Powers. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so that motion did pass on a vote of 4-0. Moving on to minutes, I did not see any minutes attached to our packet, so that we may have to come back and look at that at our next budget committee meeting. So we'll roll that over to our next meeting. Going on to new business, just some housekeeping. First item, we have the school nutrition bonus. Of course, everyone will recall that we made an amendment to our GP budget that gave a bonus to most of our employees. It did exclude our food service employees who are under a different budget, primarily federal funding. We've since received a proposal from food services to do the same type of bonus for their employees, and so that's the recommendation that they're making. Everyone saw that in the packet. Are there any questions or discussion on that? If not, is there a motion to approve? All right, got a motion by Ms. Parker, second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? If not, we're ready to vote. All right, so that motion does pass on a vote of 4-0. Moving on to the next item, we have our draft 17-18 capital budget. We just finished up a work session where we had some good, productive discussion about some of the items that have been proposed to us from the superintendent's office. And I think we're ready now to move into maybe start trying to get some work done as far as this particular budget. Mr. Breeden, if you can pull up the kind of this master plan that, okay, so we've got the index. All right. All right, so. Okay, so we've got the spreadsheet that they've brought before us, and it kind of spreads things out over a 10-year period. Kind of what we're focused on tonight is this first column. It would be the year one items, and this would make up what our capital request is to our county commission for funding. We've got several items just kind of running through that real quick. You all will notice that originally they did have EMG items listed in that year one column. Now, it's my understanding that they've since, by looking at our fund balance, we feel that maybe this may be something that we would be able to fund out of fund balance, as far as maybe starting to take responsibility for some of the EMG items. And so right now,
Those are the ones with a line through.
that's right. So right now, you'll see in those year one items where there's a mark through it, and that's just represents that instead of asking the county commission for additional funding for those EMG items, we're going to try to maybe start taking on some of those things. So in some ways, maybe that shows some good faith to our funding body that we're trying to do as much as we can with what funding that we do have, but we need some additional assistance. So let me ask, and what we're trying to do is build a budget and try to build some consensus. And if we don't have consensus on some items, we'll just put it up for vote. But as far as removing those EMG items and maybe looking at trying to tackle those with our fund balance, is there a consensus amongst the committee members that that's acceptable? Does anybody want to vote on that particular thing, whether that's removed or not? All right. So it seems like, what's that? Well, what I was thinking about doing is just kind of going through things to see where we have some consensus on. And then if there's anything that needs some more discussion, to have a vote. And then what we'll do, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go down the list. If I get nods of heads, everybody's good, we're just going to keep going on down the list. If there's something that we get to that we need to have some discussion, we need to have a vote on, then we will take that up at that time. And then what my hope is, when we get done, we will have a final revised list, and then we'll wrap that up in a main motion to cover the entire thing. So just trying to figure out a process to get through this tonight. So, Mr. Moore, did you have a question or some discussion?
I was just going to.
Okay. So we'll just run through this. So everybody, it seems like we've got some consensus on us maybe trying to tackle the EMG items on column one. Moving on down the list, we have the McDowell Elementary School. So currently that is in the year one column. And what that funding represents right there is, I guess that's, Mr. Breeden, that's the balance of, we would use EMG money that we already have for McDowell, and that would be the balance of what we would need to complete a 500-unit school at the existing location at McDowell.
Yes, and again, that's just budgeted based on, what we did is we took the same square footage, because the school has not been designed. So what I did is I took the square footage per student that we have figured at the Malin Moore School, multiplied it times 500 students, multiplied it times $220 a square foot, which was the number we were using there, and then added in the money the same kind of percentages that we use for furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and design costs.
Okay. So just going down the list. So there's the first item, and I think from our work session, there's maybe some different viewpoints on that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open up the floor. If anybody wants to make any changes, if anybody wants to remove that from the first year column, or if anybody wants to substitute that, what's existing there. Now is the time to make that proposal, and we'll have a motion, we'll have some discussion on that. Mr. Moore.
Let me do, if someone wants to speak first, I've got Ms. Parker go, I'm doing math.
I'll propose that we take off McDowell and move to having a 700 to 800 person PBL school at Baker site instead.
All right, so you have a motion to substitute what's there, and you would put in place the 700 to 800 combined school at the Baker site. So that's the motion by Ms. Parker. Is there a second to that motion? All right, we've got a second by Mr. Moore. All right, so what I'm going to do now is open the floor for discussion. Ms. Powers.
There's a lot of sense in that motion, and I see that, but I just have to reiterate, the community feedback that we did ask for sure was not in favor of combining those two.
All right, so another thing that we also need to realize, okay, so we've got those items in year one. Right now, it's around a 13.3 million item. All right, with this particular motion, this would be an increase. We'd have to go back to what the prior budget was, which was 29,094,912. So that would be a substantial increase in the budget in order to do a combined Baker.
And you have to subtract the 7.4 that we have in the EMG.
That's right. We'd have to do some subtraction. Mr. Breeden, what would be the subtraction of the EMG funds?
7,532,455.
Somebody else has already got that. Yes, that's right. It's the combination of those funds we've got for Baker McDowell, which is a total of.
All right, so you're
It's
including.
32, I assume you're using the Baker and McDowell funds that we have now, which is a combination, I have not added together, 3,248,665, 3,248,665 plus the McDowell number was 4,283,790.
Can you give me that number? You said the 3 million number twice.
3,248,6.
Don't say it slower. So, okay, 094,912 minus,
3,248,665
okay?
minus 4,283,790.
That's 21,562,460.
Okay, so I'm not following some math
21,
here.
five.
Mr. Breeden, one of the presentations, one of the slides that you had up, it had the tentative design and construction budget for McDowell at 17.6 million.
Yes, sir.
All right, and so the only thing that was removed from that figure was 4.2 million.
Yes, sir.
So if we can remove 7 million,
The other money is, we had recommended on slide one that renovations to be completed at Baker utilizing the remaining 3,248,665 designated for Baker.
okay.
So I guess I'm assuming that you would move that into the construction of the new school as well.
But I mean, as far as the EMG recommendations.
That was
we've-
that's the EMG money for Baker.
Right, but I mean, as far as after Train went through and
I
they
have not
examined-
deducted any of those monies at
Okay.
either school.
But so right now, though, based upon the examination by Train, the plumbing, instead of being like over $1 million, it's how much?
The plumbing it's less than 50,000. I'll have to look at that number. What I did was I took the money, the list that was given for the $16.5 million bond, what was listed for McDowell, I took those monies that we haven't already spent. So I think the train plumbing thing at Baker was at $18,000.
All right, so if I'm going back and looking at my stuff, what Train provided to us, the original.
I mean at McDowell, I'm sorry, I said Baker.
But at Baker, the original, what they had estimated for a budget for those items was around 3 million. And now, based upon the items that we got from Train, that number is actually around 540,000. So what would we, if we don't need as much money, what would we be utilizing that $3 million for? What additional items would we use it for at Baker?
At Baker, as far as renovation,
Right.
is to go ahead and address some of the other issues that were noted in the following years for
So we
Baker.
would go further down the list.
We go further down
on
the
Baker.
list. Because one of the big ones that we don't know yet is structural issues, because we don't have the structural study back. We know there are some structural, you walk from the hallway into a classroom and it steps down, so we know there are some structural issues. We've got a sinkhole in the front yard. We haven't addressed some of those things yet with that list. They're not on the list because they couldn't put a number to them. And so the recommendation would be that we would do that. Windows need to be replaced. They weren't listed on that original year one EMG list to move from single pane to double pane windows. That's
Well,
another issue. So
and
some
that
of
may
those
be-
kind of things. And again,
Right.
I just left the numbers there for y'all to look at, but
Right. And that may be ultimately, maybe that's the thing to do. If we save money at one existing school, we keep the money there and we do more things at that particular school. I guess the way I envisioned the process was EMG had given us a prioritized list of all the schools in a comprehensive manner. And if we save some money, if we're able to do these immediate list things up there, we would use that money, but we would just go further down the list because there may be other needs at other schools that, wouldn't necessarily.
And again, that's really for you to decide. We weren't making recommendations. We were just showing how the money could be. One of the things, I guess one of the reasons I did that is there seemed to be quite a bit of admonition from the county commission with I was with them that we use money that they thought was going to be used at one school and we're using it at another. That's what I said earlier. It's almost like if you earmark money for a school, I don't care if they need it or not, you got to spend it there once you say it. You're using it for that school because that's my community and my school.
Well,
we haven't looked at it
And maybe we
specifically
need to
that
have a
way.
better communication with them,
Yeah.
because I think when we were there having those discussions with them, we were upfront with them that we weren't sure whether, we need all that money.
Right.
And we discussed with them that, look, it's really a $30 million list. We're hoping we can get some of these things done and then get further down the list. And we may not need, that's why we didn't ask for $30 million. But let's see, Mr. Moore.
No, I appreciate your point on that, Mr. Bates. What was the, because I'm missing my numbers here on this, what was the number given for that 800 student school for the cost estimate on that?
29,094,912 was what was originally given for that 800 student school.
Could we use the same design that we're using at Spring Hill?
Yes, that was
Save
it.
architectural fees on that?
There would be some architectural fees saved in that. That was some
So-
assumption of some of that.
I guess my question is, why would that 800, if you're building them at the same time, why would that be more expensive than the Spring Hill school? if
This
they
one's
don't-
800, the one in Spring Hill's 700. It's 100 more students.
Oh, I thought we were 750 at.
No, it's 700,
700.
Okay.
700 and 800.
But that
It's a
adds
bigger building.
$5 million?
The original cost for the Spring Hill School was $26 million, including design. You wouldn't eliminate all of the architectural fees. You wouldn't be able to just, because you still got to do site work, a lot of those kind of things. So there would be some architecture, it just wouldn't be as much. And I apologize, I didn't bring the formula of how we calculated that, but it was just a budget number that was set. Again, it could, that's not saying it will cost that much or less. It could cost less than that. We were just putting a number in, trying to use comparables to what we used to calculate the school that owned the Malin Moore Road property.
So I guess for the purpose of, and I just want to be clear on what the motion is on this, or what numbers we're looking at. For the purpose of the motion, we're looking at a figure of the 29 million, roughly.
So what I've got in here is a motion to combine McDowell Baker at the Baker property at a budget of $21,562,460, combined with savings from funds set aside for EMG for both current buildings at Baker and McDowell.
Okay, and I guess that's where I would want to have some discussion on, and I do understand, because I know I brought this up when I talked about swapping the athletics for athletics. So I guess this is actually kind of doing the same thing here. It's saying, well, since it was allocated for Baker, we have to spend it back on Baker. And I would definitely be up for some discussion on, because in a way what we're doing at that point is we're shifting a cost out of what was supposed to be a repair cost, and we're now moving it to a capital construction cost. And that kind of, I understand it helps us get the number lower, but I struggle with, is that what we really want to do on that part of it? I would almost be more inclined to just go ahead and ask for the full construction cost of the school and let that $7.5 million make it all pretty far actually down the remainder of our repair list. That's kind of where I was looking at that.
Instead of asking for more repair list money ask for it in capital rather than in the repair list.
Yeah, I'm thinking, in my mind, I'm thinking of keeping it separated where we're really only going to the county commission for that, and we're not dipping back into what was repair money again and moving that over to now we're going to use that towards a capital to build the new school.
Ms. Parker?
I would tend to agree with that. I think because of how many repairs we have existing in our schools, and it's a lot easier to see a building going up than it is to see the stuff behind the walls. And I think the commission has a harder time wanting to fund that stuff. So I would tend to agree with Mr. Moore on that.
And just for analysis purposes, I mean, and this can get a little bit confusing as we're moving funds around, you know, okay, we'll use this to offset. But the bottom line number, the total cost, and getting outside of how you pay for it, but the total cost to do a combined school is what the budget that they provided to us is around 29 million. The total cost that they're presented to us in a budget to build the 500 at McDowell is around 17 million. So yes, there may be different ways you can play around with the funding, but the price tag is still 12 million more dollars. No matter how we fund it, that's 12 million more dollars. And for the life of me, I'm, you know, all due respect with everybody, I can't see spending 12 million more dollars to not add any capacity to our schools. At least if we spend the 17 million at McDowell, we at least gained another 100 on our capacity. We got something for the 17 million. But if we spend 29 million, we just went in a circle. We're right back where we started. And on top of that, we really don't have very much room for growth. Now, maybe some members are okay with building a larger elementary. Maybe we build an 800 and we add on, and we make it 1,000 as far as elementary. Now, I do not think that's what's best for the students, myself. What's that? We haven't adopted a policy yet. We keep saying that we've adopted a policy. We haven't adopted a policy yet. That's right, but we've got to vote on it. Right, but the policy doesn't come into effect until it gets posted for 30 days, then we'll come back and vote on it. So it's not in policy yet. But that's right. I mean, maybe it wouldn't go beyond 800. I don't know. But what my point is not only we're talking about spending more money to have no extra capacity, but at least if we do the rebuild at McDowell, we gain 100, and then we've got future possibilities at Baker. You know, we could add on at Baker. So we're not like confined. But if we build an 800, from my viewpoint, we're confined. We're already locked in, and we haven't added anything. So, Mr. Moore.
And just to clarify, because McDowell is currently, if you go by Dr. Register's report, has a instructional model capacity of 371, and Baker has one of 385. So going to an 800-student school would add, again, if we're getting particular here, it's going to add 44 students, I think, if I did my math correctly. So, and looking at the McDowell change would be going from 371 to essentially 480. And I know that, like I said, they said 500, but really it's 480. So again, you're talking about 109 students. So both are adding some capacity, not a lot. I think, and one is more expensive, but I think you're also taking care of you're kind of wiping out and starting the clock over on the maintenance and repairs for 2 schools rather than just one. So I think that has to be factored in as well.
And you didn't count the renovations at Baker. You're not taking into consideration the renovations at Baker that need to be done.
Right, which my understanding from Train is it's around 500,000.
It's $3 million.
500,000 on the electrical, but there's other things on the list.
Okay, if we go further down the list, that's true.
And just to let you guys know, if this motion does pass, I recommend the next motion be to charge the superintendent and his office with beginning a rezoning plan of all the elementary schools in the Columbia area. Because that's going to have to happen, because you're right, if we build the 800, we're close to capacity when we open the doors. And if we're looking at Monsanto Road possibly coming off, the city council approves that, that's a monkey wrench in the plans. We're going to have to start that process.
All right, so going back, let me correct something just real quick. So what needs to be done right now at Baker per train is the 540,000 in electrical work. But the thing, what they're saying in the future, and I don't know what year that was it 2020, Mr. Breeden? When we have the AC that's coming up of 1.5.
That is correct, yeah, I think it was for the fourth year. Is it 2020 or 2020?
Right.
Yeah, something like that. I
Right.
think that's right.
And we know we have structural problems.
There are some structural problems we have.
But as far as the funding that we asked for, as far as the EMG list, when we went, what is part of that total 3 million? The only thing we asked for were the
$3.2 million.
things that were on the
If we remove,
immediate.
yeah, if we remove the plumbing and we drop the electrical, they've said around $500,000 on the
Right.
electrical. That would cut the number down to about $1.7 million at Baker.
Right. But what we asked, when we went to the commission, what we asked for were the things on the immediate list. So
And
we
the-
didn't
Right, I
get funding, we didn't get funding for the HVAC,
Right. Yeah.
that 16 million. Now, yes, we could, if we get savings, we could bring up more things on the list, but then there's the question of, there's other schools too that were further down the list. I mean,
Right.
is that fair to just for that one school, so.
Well, and as far as rezoning, it looks like you're gonna have to do that anyway. Because if you're adding at max 100, or you're adding 40, and neither one of, and we have all these kids moving in, you're gonna have to rezone regardless of what we do. Whether you have 2 schools there or 1 school there, you're gonna have to rezone.
Gotcha. Sure.
All right. So we got a motion on the floor. It's got a second. Any other discussion on the motion?
Yeah, can we clarify exactly?
Going back to the 29094, right? Sorry, excuse me. So it's motion to combine McDowell Baker at the Baker property at a budget of $29,094,912. Combined, oh no, that's it, just period. Done. Combined Baker and McDowell at the $29,094,912 cost.
Is that a correct statement of the motion, Ms. Parker? Was that, I mean, is that your motion?
Sorry, yeah, motion to combine McDowell Baker at the Baker property at a budget of $29,094,912. Done. Good? Good.
Okay. Mr. Atkinson.
I just want to say, I want to agree with Ms. Powers, and Mr. Bates. You're looking at taking a piece of history out of Columbia there, when you do away with McDowell, the name, McDowell School. That's a piece of downtown history, Columbia history. I don't think the county commissioner's going to go along with it, and I don't think the community's going to go along with it. I think we do need to build a school there at McDowell.
And I think that's a good point. I mean, and I certainly, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Moore. I think you had your light on. Go ahead.
Just real quick, I just want to clarify again to make sure we feel like we can have, I don't think I asked this one earlier when I asked all the rest of them, the combo building, can that be completed by August 2019 as well, or is that a different date? If we were to do a Baker McDowell?
Get it funded, the architectural funding, and get it started with.
Yeah, I'm basing all the assumption here that were this to pass, we would ask for it and get it funded. We're still at August 2019. Y'all are good.
We had asked that question earlier too and got that same response when we were meeting with them and the design team.
Anyway, so I was going to just follow up, Mr. Atkinson. I mean, I think that's something we've got to take into consideration. Yes, we've got, that's why we get paid the big bucks. We got to make the tough decisions, and we got to look at all factors, and we got to make as wise a decision as we can. But we are part of our community. I mean, we're making decisions for our community. We're making decisions for our schools, and we've got the input from our community, and it's overwhelming that they do not believe we should be combining those 2 schools. And it's overwhelming that they believe that we should be leaving McDowell intact. And maybe that's not what we agree with the community, but that's our community, and that's our taxpayers. And really, as far as asking for funding from the county commissioners, they are community members as well. And I've talked with some of the county commissioners, and the overwhelming input that I've received is not to combine Baker and McDowell. That's not me saying it. That's what they're telling me. Because they're members of this community. They have children that have gone to McDowell. They have some that you would not even think, maybe way out in another district, and they went to McDowell. So we have to recognize that, I think, as part of our decision-making. Is that the deciding factor? It's not always the deciding factor, but I think it's a factor that we have to at least listen to. And I do appreciate where members are coming from trying to save costs, and I'm a big believer on trying to save costs. And I understand, maybe if you got a combined school, it's brand new, it's shiny, it doesn't maybe have as many maintenance costs, but we still have to look at a bottom line. It's going to cost $12 million more to build a new school. So you can add up the maintenance cost all day long until you get to $12 million. You haven't even broke even. It's only that you start seeing a return after you've netted the $12 million worth of repairs and renovations. And we're nowhere near that with Baker right now. I mean, even if we add everything, go down the list, we're not anywhere near $12 million. And so bottom line, no matter way you turn this, we're talking about spending more money. When we have an existing facility that our community is willing to stand behind. It'd be different if we had members of the community coming up and saying, Baker is just ready to just fall apart, and you all need to tear it down. Now, if that was the case, if I was getting that input, then I may be coming from this from a completely different perspective, but that's not the input that I've received. Ms. Parker.
Mr. Moore, did you? Okay. I was just going to say, when we decided that we were going to rezone children from Wright to Howell, the response was overwhelming as well, and we still chose to send kids to Howell. So sometimes we have to make a tough decision. And with regards to the commission, if they choose to reject this, that's fine. I mean, this is a draft budget at this point. If they choose to turn it down and say, no, you need to build a new McDowell, I'll be fine with that. I really will. I just don't think that building a 500-person school less than a mile away from Baker and, I don't know, maybe a mile and a half from Riverside has ever made sense. It made sense probably 60 years ago when Columbia wasn't as big as it is now. But we're growing, so I think that we have to look forward, not backwards. And I appreciate history. I'm a history major. I love history all day long. But at the end of the day, those walls talking are not going to educate my kids. And they're not going to educate the kids that are in there right now. And quite frankly, right now, the bats are educating them. So we've got to do something about it. This is a proposal. It's not set in stone, in my opinion, because this still has to go to the full board. So I was just trying to move the discussion, and I'm not comfortable with the 500-person McDowell school because we already heard that it was really 480. So any way you slice it, we're still not where we wanted to be when we started to put into place those policies as far as looking ahead.
And I appreciate that, Ms. Parker. I really do. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I will say that, and this could be just different perspectives. It may not be that we're talking over each other. We may just be, different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And I realize that maybe sometimes things do seem outdated. It's like, well, that's the way they always did things. But I kind of believe that things run in cycles, and what was old becomes new, and new becomes old. I mean, it's like my girls.
Schools. Yeah, they're
some
new
of the stuff
again.
they're wearing right now, and I'm like, this is really outdated stuff, but it's come back. The fashion's come back. And I really think that it may be the case as far as our Columbia schools. I know that we have a lot of smaller schools, but I tend to believe that is a crown jewel. I tend to believe that that's an asset. And I really think that there's people that are coming to Columbia because of that. It's actually not something to be we're trying to get out of, a new way. It's becoming the new way. And I think that it's actually, like I said, I think it's an asset for our community, and I also think it's an asset from an academic standpoint. I think it does, I'm not trying to say that it's like a silver bullet or anything like that, but I do go back that I do believe that it has some academic benefits of having a smaller school. It makes things a little bit easier for the principals, makes things a little bit easier for the teachers. And if I have an opportunity to do that as a board member, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for removing those speed bumps. It's not going to be, a cure-all, but if I can make a teacher's job a little bit easier, if I can make a principal's job a little bit easier, that's where I kind of feel like, from a board standpoint, that's where I want to put my money. And I really think that with this proposal, with the school at McDowell, I think it's a win-win. I think it's a win-win for our community. I think it's a win for McDowell because, like you said, and I think your points are well taken, that something should have been done years ago. So, and I think it's a win for those students. I really do. So that's just my perspective.
I
on
will
things.
say, I disagree as far as using the numbers and trying to take Train and say, oh, we only have to spend $500,000 here based on what Train said. Because if we go back to what Train said at Culleoka, as far as what we needed to repair there, we've spent a lot of money. And Train's not necessarily going to get the job if we have to do plumbing repairs at Baker, but if that gets bid out, they may or may not get that. But if they're there right now and they fix it in stages, and they're our go-to as far as plumbing goes, then I think they have an advantage. And so but I haven't always felt that they've been cost conscious on Culleoka. So I'm using that as my basis for why I don't necessarily trust that we just have to spend that. Just because they said it's good right now doesn't mean that that sinkhole's not going to rupture and the plumbing's going to have to be completely replaced again. So I just think that there's some of those issues that you can't just say, oh, we only have to spend $500,000 on Baker.
And look, and I do wish we always had good, reliable information. I've had some of those frustrations as well. But from my perspective, I've got to go at least with what information I have. And that's the best information that we do have at the moment. And is it always going to be right? I don't know. But I at least got to rely upon what information that I do have. So, Mr. Atkinson.
Yeah, you're right. You can't go by just what they're telling you right now, 500,000. Yeah, it may not be that right now, but here in a couple of years, yeah, it'd probably be 100,000 here, 100,000 there. Well, 29,000 is their projected bid, or 29 million, excuse me, 29 million is their projected bid for a new scoop, 800 capacity scoop. 6 months, that price can jump up to 35 million, just overnight. They don't know that. All they're doing is predicting. So it goes both ways on that. As far as student capacity, I don't see spending an extra $12 million for 42 students, if that's the number he give. It just, that's what you're gaining, 42 students on the combination of McDowell and Baker. $12 million, that just don't sound right. I still think McDowell is a need. Like I said, it's a piece of history. What else was I going to say on that? I'm sorry. I can't think of it right now.
It's probably really good because those are the things I can't remember. Mr. Moore.
Okay, just for discussion's sake here, Mr. Bates, were we just talk about switching gears about just doing the McDowell, would you be more in favor of the not including the $4.2 million? Actually going back and actually we would be asking the commission for the full 17,680 rather than the 13,397. I'm just trying to keep apples to apples in the discussion here.
I mean, to me, that if we have already $4 million for McDowell, yes, we would apply that towards the cost of the school.
But we just talked about not including it as we instead of reducing the 29 million. from
No,
the
I
combined
was talking
facility.
about Baker,
That would be both.
right.
Again, I want to make sure we're discussing things on the same here, because we're going both ways here on that. Because if we were going to do, if we're going to ask for the commission for the full 29 million and not subtract the 7.5 million for both Baker and McDowell,
Well,
then we would need to ask them for the full 17.6 and not subtract the 4.5 million.
right.
I'm sure, again, I'm looking at my
Well,
big
and
number here.
again, that's where, look, the bottom line is, yes, we can use different funding for different purposes, but the bottom price tag, the total cost is 29 million, no matter what pocket you use to spend that. The total cost on what they're talking about with McDowell is 17 million, no matter what you use, to fund that. What my point was, is we're taking off the total $7 million off the combined, and that's fine. I'm good with that. What my question was is, why are we only taking off 4 on the McDowell if we know that the funds that were on that immediate list were maybe not, we're not gonna have to use? Now, maybe that's not, I mean, I can see the argument that maybe, well, if we've got some extra savings in Baker, we shouldn't use that to build the McDowell project. I mean, I think that's a valid point. Maybe we use that to go further down the EMG list. But I just see that there is some additional available funding there with the Baker project.
I think, and I'd speak for the superintendent for this, I think the intention was, based on the survey that was taken, to, again, replace McDowell and repair Baker. And I think they were wanting to use that EMG money to initiate some of the upgrades, not repair, but that'd actually be more of a renovation. I think that was the intent, and the superintendent could definitely step in on that, but I think that was what they were thinking to follow along with the survey, was to replace the McDowell and renovate.
And that may be
Baker.
okay. That may be okay, but again, I think that's something that, is up for discussion.
Well, the only thing I'll say, and we quit talking about this, to be honest. The reality is, whether we build a 500 student school or an 800 student school, we're going to be at or near capacity in short order. And as soon as the growth comes, we're going to be talking about a new school in either one of them. So that, to me, it's the margin there is not big enough to make the difference. But the reality for me is, when we talk about building that next school, we're not going to be building a 500 student school. We're just not. And you all know it. We didn't do it. It's not going to happen. We can't afford to do it. We went through this when we just did the new school in Spring Hill. And with the addition we just did at Marvin Wright, it's not going to happen because it is not fiscally responsible to afford to do it. We cannot keep building that many schools. And that's what I keep coming back to. So we're doing something once, just for a one-time thing, knowing that we're never going to do that again. And we can wish, I understand that you like small schools, and some people on the board do like the small schools. But when it comes down to decision, it's not going to happen. And I'll be here long enough to watch it not happen in this county. So it's just not going to happen. We're going to have to build larger schools because we cannot afford to build a bunch of 500 student schools in this county because of the growth that's coming, which is not going to happen.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Moore. I appreciate your perspective. I would just respectfully say, I mean, ultimately, it would be up for the board, and it'd be up for future boards. And maybe other board members, they may feel exactly as you feel. And you may be right, but I mean, that's not my decision to make. That's not any one individual member's decision to make. That's ultimately, that would be up to future boards to decide. So anyway, I appreciate where everybody's coming from, and I think this has been, a respectful discussion. It's been a good discussion. So is there any other discussion on this particular motion that's on the table? All right, seeing none, we're ready to vote. All right, so that motion does fail on a vote to 2-2. All right, so right now, we're potentially at an impasse.
Could I suggest we move on down the list, and maybe we could circle back to that
All right, sounds good.
before we just get stuck on going in circles on that one?
All right. All right, let's try to, see what we can do. Moving on, we have the Mount Pleasant addition, the $493,000, that would be for design costs. And I know we had some discussion during the work session about possibly maybe not putting that on the 1 year or the first year. Mr. Moore?
Oh, that's where I was going to go with that. I didn't know if I need to make a motion on putting that to year 2.
Well, let me see, since it is in the column right now, we probably do need a motion if we are going to remove that, I would think.
Motion.
All right, so motion by Mr. Moore to move to year 2. All right,
And do we want to say Mount Pleasant Elementary School addition or Mount Pleasant Middle School addition to accommodate MPES? How do you want to state it, David?
we just know that we're moving whatever's in column 1 to year 2.
Motion to not year 1. Gotcha.
All right.
Motion to move Mount Pleasant Elementary School, to Mount Pleasant Middle School to year 2. Sound good?
And what we're removing is the design cost.
So I upped the number from what it was to add back in the design cost. So year 2 is construction and design, is that what you want?
If the motion passes. So don't get ahead, that's what, oh, okay, all right.
Motion to move design costs for Mount Pleasant Elementary School to Mount Pleasant Middle School to year 2.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we got a motion, is there a second? All right, got a second by Ms. Powers. All right, any discussion on that motion?
Wait.
Nope, got some discussion.
The only thing, and there was some discussion earlier about this, and I don't know how much we want to get into this. I start to be really uncomfortable, and I know we did this in the past, about deferring EMG maintenance stuff because we're not doing something. Would that take place in this? I don't want, because I know the first page said we were going to defer the EMG list items for that school. If I'm not mistaken, did I read that wrong?
But, all right, so we've already got a 16.5 million prioritized list that we received funding for last year. Is there anything that we've held up on? Well, my question was, have we held off
At
on
Mount
doing
Pleasant
anything at Mount
Elementary?
Pleasant Elementary?
Yes, we
Okay.
have. Yeah,
So-
the original, we've got about half the stuff that's still on there. There's some ADA restroom reconfiguration, deal with a water storage tank, a water heater, elevator, lift, wheelchair lift up one floor, which is on the stage, a concrete ramp to install. There's some additional HVAC equipment, which we have not dealt with, that is not broken, but is old. You know, it's working, but it's old.
Well, I guess I can clarify my position on that. Putting that off, I'm uncomfortable just like stopping all repairs or those kind of things just because we're putting that off. I want to make sure that if there's something that needs to be done, we're still doing those repairs. So I don't know if I need to modify my, I've always been uncomfortable that when we talk about, well, we may do something with this next year, well, let's just stop all repairs on it. That always makes me uncomfortable. So if I need to modify my motion to say that I want to move that to the year or 2, but go back and make sure that if it was on the EMG list and it's the prioritized list and there is a staff determines that there's a need to do those repairs, and we need to be doing those repairs. And I understand that sometimes mean we do kind of throw good money after bad, but I don't think that's fair and appropriate to wait on those items.
And looking at it that way, it's probably 3 years at least down the road. So those items that need to be done to make the school, to bring the school up to where it needs to be, should be done.
Yeah, there's about $235,000 worth of stuff still on the list. We did quit. We were going through and addressing them, and we just stopped when Dr. Register made his recommendation. So we just haven't analyzed those items, just haven't looked at them, so we would go back and start addressing those again.
I mean, and technically, that's in another page of this, and we're only dealing with this year one numbers list, so I don't know if I need to do a motion on that or take care of that in some other format. But that would be my intention, that if we're gonna delay that, we don't delay any more repairs.
Yeah, can we maybe just make that part of your motion then, if that's
that
okay
would-
with Ms. Powers?
How much is in year two?
Okay.
What was that language? What's the wording?
Reinstate
Under the, as staff
Okay.
determines under the appropriate repairs that need to take place.
Okay.
For which we already have the funding for the
Yes.
16.5.
We have that for the first year. Now, as Dave and I were looking at the list, there's a lot of repairs for Mount Pleasant Elementary that they predicted in year 2 and 3. Again, not saying that they have to be done, but there's some equipment that's reaching some old age, so there may be some additional things if we don't move forward with this that will break, that we'll have to fix.
And that may be phase 2 to all this, once we know what our fund balance
sure.
is. We're gonna have to come back and see what were some things that we didn't get on the $16.5 million list that we want to expand, and I think we would probably address those sorts of things at that
Because
time.
we are actually, what Dr. Register did on his recommendation is he didn't recommend any repairs for Baker, McDowell, or Mount Pleasant. Not just the first year, because, we're actually now about to enter year 2, according to EMG's numbers. We've just completed year 1. We're getting ready. So there are things in year 2 and year 3 that were on the list that we just haven't addressed because we moved forward with the assumption that we were following his recommendation until you all decided
The only
something
thing I would
different.
say, Mr. Bates, is that technically, it shouldn't have to be included in a motion. They would still be following under the directive when we first passed the MG
I
report.
agree.
Okay.
I mean, would that be appropriate? You would agree with that as well? So,
It'd be probably good to have that in the motion, though, just to
Okay,
make sure
that's
that
fine.
that's very clear.
So I've got 2 sentences. Motion to move design costs for combinations of MPES to MPMS to year 2, and then also reinstate the MPES EMG repairs that staff deemed necessary. Thank you. We've got a motion from Mr. Moore, second by Ms. Powers.
Any more discussion on the motion? Saying now we're ready to vote.
Please vote now.
All right, so the motion passes on a vote of 4-0. That item is now in column 2. Moving on down the list. Mr. Breeden, Mr. Moore's asked that the Spring Hill, I guess the Spring Hill Elementary School numbers be updated.
yes, sir, to the 25,850 number instead of the 24, just so we're looking at on our worksheet.
That's a good point.
I think the number you gave us earlier was 25,850,000.
All right, while they're updating that, let's go ahead and move on and have some discussion on some other things. All right. All right, so we're going to get that number updated on the Spring Hill Elementary. All right, so we had some discussion during the work session about moving the Spring Hill Middle estimated costs over to column 1. Is there a motion on that?
Not a motion yet. I have a question. Is it wise to do that when it only 750 students? And not do it at the intended final number?
What's the question
Spring
again?
Hill Middle School, or the new.
You're suggesting go ahead and make it at 1,000 students, which I think would be what our final goal would be. It would certainly be cheaper to do that now than later. That, again, we were just functioning off what Dr. Register recommended.
Do we have a ballpark number for what that would be?
Let me freeze my screen a minute and I'll do a little calculating here.
I apologize, Stan. I'm making,
that's okay.
making you do a lot of math.
It's better now than later. This is good.
I thought I had a formula in here. I don't. Let's go with. Oh, you can see it up there. I'm just frozen on this screen.
10,000.
1,000
We're looking behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's okay. It had a $30 million.
times, I think I used 155 square feet per student times 220 times 1.2. That's probably about right.
Okay. Go ahead and unfreeze. There you go.
Let's see, did I freeze? Yeah, there we go. So that would be, that would probably be the total cost, including the design fee. That'd be the total cost, including the design fee.
And remember, budget.
I'd make a motion to move that to year one.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Moore to remove this updated number into column 1 on line 23. Is there a second on that? Did you second that, Ms. Parker? Okay, so we got a second by Ms. Parker.
That was design fees. So I just added them into the 4920. That includes design.
Oh, you did, okay.
That includes design. I just took 220. I did 155 square foot per student. That was $220 times, and then added 20%.
How much was Central?
Which
Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought he was looking it up on his phone until I noticed him. Yeah. How much is Central?
The GMP, $42,986,000.
Total cost for Central was $48 million when you add in design fees and furnishing fixtures and equipment.
And this would include furnishers.
Yes, I was trying to do a whole budget. And I don't, pardon me? I included them in here. Yeah.
So I've got,
Well, when I calculate 40 million over here, the design fees before was calculated based on that, but I just threw the design fees into the 40 million.
yeah. So
I
I've
had
got,
broken them out on those other two.
okay. So, David, I've got motion to approve moving, comma, into year 1, comma, costs for new Malin Moore Middle School at $40,920,000.
And again, my formula for that, I don't mind sharing, is I did 1,000 students times 155 square feet per student times $220 plus 20% for design and furniture and fixtures and equipment overhead. That's the way we did the other budgets. We just used 140 square feet.
I would only say that I would hope that that is an overestimation based on the addition we just did at Marvin Wright and the cost there. Because I would think if you're building a 750 student school, you've already built in the core, you're really only adding classrooms.
Are you talking about middle school?
Yeah.
Athletic facilities too.
Well, that was a given. That was already on the first number.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not adding more athletic facilities for the additional 250 students. We're just adding classrooms because the core was already there, the athletic facilities.
More
I would-
bathrooms, bigger cafeteria.
No,
bigger
no,
athletics.
hold up. You already said you had built the building. See, this is where we're gonna have a problem then.
What?
Because you said you'd already designed the building, or the numbers were based on a core capacity of 1,000 with the ability to, to move up to that from the 750.
What are you talking about?
The middle school.
The elementary school?
Middle school.
What do you mean the middle school?
Okay.
You lost me.
We're talking about middle school here.
Yeah.
Of 750, with the assumption that there's a,
Students and it jumped
it shouldn't jump the full amount because you've already built in the core cost of the, I understand, I'm just questioning.
Just on the fly, that's as quick as I can give you. I'd have to go back and get more in-depth
I understand.
information
I
to
would
give you a
think it
better
would be
number
a
than
few
that.
million short of that if we actually looked at what it should be.
I thought I had the formula in there for how I calculated before, and I didn't. I just had a hard number, so I gotta go back and find where that number was.
Do you understand what I'm saying, though? That
Yeah.
we've already, at the 750, we've already built in all of these things to be able to add to. So you're really just adding classrooms and bathrooms. You're not adding extra sports fields. You're not adding cafeteria.
So I add the word budgeted in there. So the costs are not 40 million, but budgeted at, yeah.
All right, so moving on, looks like the next item on the list would be the Spring Hill High School addition. Currently, what's proposed is the $8.7 million that is for putting parking as well as cafeteria, auditorium. Is there any motions to make any changes to that or remove that?
We're talking about our own districts here now. I'm just kidding. I'll move that we approve 200, I think it was 250,000 or thereabouts for parking for year one.
And would you move
The
the
rest
other
over
items
year
into
two.
into year two? So it's not that we would completely eliminate it, you would just put 250 in year one and the rest, the balance would be in year two.
Correct.
All right, so does everybody understand the motion? All right, is there a second on that motion? All right, got a second by Mr. Moore. All right, so open the floor for discussion on that. Mr. Moore.
I know that was the number that was originally for the parking. Do we still feel like that meets that need?
Yeah, the parking was pretty much standalone from the other construction. We actually got estimates from the civil engineer on parking and estimates from the architect on the other, so.
I just know when we start pulling things out, I want to make sure that that number is still a comfortable number to meet that need. If you're saying that is, then okay.
That provides us about 200 additional parking places.
Okay.
That's what he told me.
Any other discussion on the motion?
So the motion is a motion to approve upgrading parking at Spring Hill High School, comma, in year one, comma, at a budget of 250,000. The remainder of improvements for Spring Hill High School move into year two. Is that acceptable? Okay.
All right, so that motion does pass. Moving on, we're getting close to the end of this. We've got the buses. I've looked at the schedule that's been presented to us. I didn't really have a whole lot of questions about that schedule. Let me open the floor to see if anybody has any questions or discussion regarding the bus schedule. And Mr. Breed, maybe you can just talk just real briefly. I guess we've got a rotation schedules where we buy a certain number of buses every year to try to replace it. But this year we would also be looking at maybe trying to get caught up on maybe some expanding some zones, and we would also do away with the walk zone. Is that correct as far as this request?
We'd eliminate the parent responsibility zone.
Okay.
Yes. We actually are facing several things this year. We are in a zero replacement year. I actually have no buses that roll off at the end of next year. However, if you look at the proposal for next year, we were asked to do a couple of things. One was to go back and revisit the parent responsibility walk zone issue. Two, we have a bubble, not a bubble year, but kind of a bubble year in a few years coming up where there would be 22 buses rolling off at one time. And that came from back in the past, they ordered a year's worth of buses and did not receive delivery until August of the following year. And then that year's buses came in April. And so you have 2 years of buses that will roll off at the same time. The commission actually made a request of us to try to escape the bubble year of 22. So we're looking at escaping the bubble year, looking at the parent responsibility zone, and then you can see in that top number up there, I actually have 5 buses right now that I need. And I know that you just heard me say that to you this time last year, but we have pulled sub buses that we are running full-time routes with. We have 2 buses that at fall break we had to pull sub buses and start new routes in Spring Hill, because in adding the 5 buses from last spring into our fleet, we were already behind the 8 ball in Spring Hill that much. Our ridership is gone up quite a bit. We are also looking that if school weren't going to end in about 2 weeks, I need another bus right now in Spring Hill. I am running a sub special ed bus right now, and based on talks with Ms. Ventura and Mr. Breeden, we need another special ed bus for next year. So I actually have 3 sub buses that are running currently that I'm using sub drivers as full-time drivers. I have a bus that would have to be pulled from the sub fleet and added if we were continuing past 2 weeks. And then I have a special ed bus that's adding as well. What we did was sit down with Dr. Register's numbers and looked, and over the next 10 years based on his numbers, and we've had discussions that we think in some cases his numbers are conservative in some areas on the number of students added. We would have to add 39 school buses in the next 10 years based on his numbers. So what we did for this year, and you can see I've got basically 3 different things up there, the G1, G2, G3, all that. Those are the growth buses that I need in blue. If not, then I have to continue running substitute buses. But there are routes that have to be run. So it's either a sub bus runs it or we put a new bus in service. I will tell you, last Thursday we had no buses in the afternoon because there were so many ball trips. And with our buses, we've crashed one, you know, we're down a bus. And we had, if someone had broken down last Thursday afternoon, there was no one going to get them on another bus. So we're running tight right there. So those are needed because I'm going to have to pull 2 more if not. Then the parent responsibility zone came up again. We're sitting at about 1,257 to 1,270. I think I updated that number to Mr. Breeden. It's about 1,270 kids in that PRZ zone. And we're about to face a couple of things. One, we're adding kids to our walk zone, PRZ zone in Marvin Wright. We have 2,000 new homes about to be built around Spring Hill Middle School. Spring Hill Middle School is the only school that currently does not have a student who lives in its walk zone. So we're about to see a number of students add that would not receive service. And then based off of the Malon Moore site, that is actually the first time that this board or any board in recent memory would look at taking services away from folks. Because if you look at those folks on Hummingbird, they receive busing services now. They would not with a PRZ zone being established. That didn't happen at Spring Hill Middle. That didn't happen at Marvin Wright. Mount Pleasant already is dealing with the walk zone. So the last 3 times we've built schools, we've not removed a service. The Malon Moore site, would remove service from folks. So what we brought that back to you, the numbers haven't changed, 7 buses for that, and then the 5. If you go through the next 4 years after that, we adjusted them to meet or to eliminate the bubble year that they ask us to, while also addressing the growth needs based off of Dr. Register. So the 5 buses are going to run for those 5 routes, either sub buses or buses that replace them. And then again, the PRZ zone is up to you guys.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just tag on to Mr. Perriman's comments, I want to add 2 things. One is we did not budget in our general purpose budget for any additional drivers. So if we add this, we would need to increase the general purpose bus budget to add drivers for these buses. And it would include, you see there, this is a total of 12 new buses, but also Ms. Ventura has told us that federal funding, she will not provide her for any more attendance. Currently, we provide an attendant on each one of our special ed buses, and those are currently being paid for. Well, 25 of those, we have 26 right now. 25 of those are being paid by federal funds. The 26 we're paying out of the GP budget. So we would need to pay the other 2, these 2 additional out of the GP2 to have a attendant on those buses. So you'll be talking about an additional 14 employees. We figure that, is that right, 14? 12 and 2, yeah, 14 employees. We figured $22,000 per bus driver, including salaries and benefits. So you're talking about an addition of about $308,000 to the general purpose budget to fund the drivers and attendants for these buses. I'll add one other thing, and this is a minor thing, but it might want to be considered. There is a law that looks like it has a good chance of passing in the state legislature right now that says that beginning in 2019, we will need to add seat belts to our buses. The way the law is written now, that will not be retroactive. So any buses we buy now would not apply to. There's a couple of considerations. Obviously, that's going to drive up the cost per bus when we do that, but also that's going to decrease the capacity of a bus by a third. Because when you go to seat belts, there'll be 2 students to a seat, where now capacity is figured at 3 students per seat. So that's something to be thoughtful about for the future, but there is a huge impact to that law to our costs.
And just, that would add about, at current numbers, that would add about 30 to 35 buses to our fleet immediately. If it went in, of course, you wouldn't have to retrofit, but it would take that many more buses to serve what we're serving right now, with no growth numbers at all, just based on the capacity being cut back.
All right, so we just need to recognize, so if we leave that number as is, that's in the budget right now, the $1,082,000 for expanding buses, that's going to affect us next week when we look at the GP budget, because we'll have to add additional drivers, and that's going to, you're estimating just on the, I don't know if it's on the fly or what, but around 300,000.
22,000 times 14
Okay.
is what I did.
Ms. Morency.
Could you explain to me the reasoning behind decreasing the parent responsibility zone?
The decreasing it, we actually brought this, and I think last March I brought this, or February I brought this to the board.
Well,
And
we weren't
did
here.
we did a study. We were asked, actually Mr. Lindsay was the one that had asked us to look at districts that were our size and districts that are in our area and see how we compare. Our policy says that walk zone is 1.5 miles. It is adjusted due to dangers in road conditions or hazards for travel. And those have been established. We've not moved one because this kind of had been in question. We've not made any changes. But for an example, the zone for Cox Middle School for Randolph Howell does not cross Bear Creek Pike. But if you live on that side of Bear Creek Pike, it does go east and west on there. So that type of thing. We brought to the board a couple of things. One, at that time we said about 1,250. That was an estimate when we came in, and we were pretty tickled that when we actually ran it through Versatrans this year, initially it was 1,257 kids that live in that zone. The two largest areas that are affected are Mount Pleasant and Highland Park. Highland Park only has about 21 children that ride a school bus. And if you looked at the Highland Park zone, they're not the 21 that I would have said needed to ride the school bus. They're actually closer to the school and in not as bad a places as some of the other kids with zone changes that have gone on there. So when we brought that, we said the districts around us, the largest responsibility zone we could find was 0.3 of a mile. That was Wilson County, and that's a comparable size to us. The same thing with, we also have in our policy, if you remember, that's the only transportation policy we did not update, and we held off for this reason. We also have a walk to stop distance of 0.6 of a mile. So even out in rural areas, we can say, if you live 0.6 of a mile, we can make you walk somewhere else to get on the bus. And that happens in neighborhoods like Glencoe and Culleoka and other places where we make people walk long distances to come to a stop. We've not adjusted very many of those. We have when it came to light and it was clearly a danger. We've gone out to some places, Oak Lane here in Columbia. We went, there's no way that I would have my child who's 17 make that walk, much less the kids that we were asking. So we've adjusted some walk to distance, but we left this policy alone. When we brought the walk zone numbers, we also brought the predator numbers. I will tell you, we've been able to add predators to our new system, and not only are they mapped by the county, they are mapped in our new bus system. We know where they live, assuming that they've done what they were supposed to and actually checked in and haven't moved. And we find that they have a very high frequency of movement. But those were the two big issues we brought. I will tell you, and Mr. Breeden, I think, would agree, beyond the bus drove real fast through our neighborhood, and the number one complaint is the bus didn't come on time. Those are the two. The most common call we get is, why is my child not eligible to ride a school bus? Or have to walk such a distance. So this is something that we brought about, I believe, and you guys did last year. You pushed it forward. I do believe that it was the only thing the commission did not fund. But what we're looking at, and we've worked with the city of Mount Pleasant. Dr. Marzak and I actually went and met with Mount Pleasant this year. We're looking at different areas, but we're about to see big growth. One of the apartment complexes Mr. Breeden just mentioned is actually across the street, but down a little bit from Brown. So we're about to see walk numbers go back up in some areas. And again, the Maylon Moore site's the first time we're actually saying this may be a removal of services from taxpayers, and we've not done that. So we just brought this back. I will say, as far as next year's, I need the buses in blue, the buses in red. We are of the opinion that we need to either do away with or greatly reduce that walk zone. You remember that I gave you numbers for a half mile, a quarter mile, and 0. To go to a half mile from a mile and a half is 5 buses, a quarter mile is 7, and 0 is still 7. So our recommendation from the transportation department would be, if you live next door to Mount Pleasant Elementary School, but you want to ride, we're going to pick you up. That would be our recommendation, is that we're just going to say, we'll give you a ride no matter where you are. But we do not have, one, the bus power, the manpower to do that. If you said, we're going to buy you these buses, please know these buses wouldn't be here until the spring of next year at the earliest. So to do away with parent responsibility zone is at least a year out.
Let me just adjust what he just said by one little bit. It wouldn't be here till spring of next year, assuming that the county funds them the way they've been funding them, because they usually don't give us the money to order them. If they were funded from some other source that the funds became available immediately.
25 days.
Yeah, we could get them sooner, but that's assuming that the county funds them through their capital budget, and they release them when the tax money's received in February usually. It's about when they tell us we can order buses.
And I can turn a bus around in about 25 days if I have the funds. If we do it the way, like Mr. Breeden said, that they've done it where we choose to order it, what we do is we order in the fall, and they do not have the tax money available until usually late January, February, March. So we're not allowed to take delivery until they have that tax money available. So that's why I say if it goes to them and they fund it that way, we're a year out.
Thank you, Mr. Perryman. Ms. Powers, I think you had a question.
What'd you say about the school, those apartments near Brown? Are you talking about the ones behind Chick-fil-A?
No, that's one that those will be in the brown zone, where
You
Lighthouse.
never have them cross Campbellsville Pike? No way.
No.
Okay.
However, where Lighthouse Baptist was, there's a section. However, I will say, if you live beside the old Pizza Hut building, you walk to Highland Park. So, just so you know, that's you don't cross James Campbell, but it's still a pretty good trek right there. So, the Highland Park zone has 39 sexual predators in the zone.
All right, so, but with this current funding that's being brought to us, this would eliminate those, or reduce those zones, so we wouldn't have that as big of an issue.
This would allow us to pick up every student who wanted to ride a bus.
So that's currently in column 1, and let me open the floor to see if anybody wants to remove that, or add to it, or subtract from it.
And I might just add, I don't know how you would come about it, but if the buses were turned around in 25 days, we could pick them up day one.
Okay.
We can make that happen.
All right, so going back to our big picture as far as our budget goes, I think we've made some changes with column 1. We've added some things, we've taken some things away. And then as far as McDowell, I mean, there was a motion to remove that, but that's still currently in the proposal right now. So that needs to be added back.
Okay, McDowell,
Right. So you all originally had the 13,397.
okay, so I'm sorry, I thought number 1, the motion for the number 1 was to replace McDowell with that
And that
school, so
failed.
Oh, it did? Okay,
Yeah, it
I'm
did.
sorry, I didn't go back and adjust my numbers, so I need to do that.
So while he fixes that, this is the current motion that I have. Motion to approve buses at $1,082,800. Add drivers to GP budget at a cost of, is it $308,000, Eric?
Well, I don't think we don't have a motion, do we? Nobody's made a motion.
No, it's just when I'm typing as
No,
people
so
talk.
I don't think we need a motion just yet. That's
problem.
currently in column 1. Now, we may have to come back on the GP budget and make some amendments or additions
will.
next week, so on that. But right now, it's currently in, nobody's taken it out of what's been proposed. All right, so we've made some changes. So we've gone through the list. Now, yes, Mr. Moore.
And I'm gonna go over this again. Is there no way to get that to 600 students at McDowell?
I don't think so. I really don't. I mean, we can have them take another look at it, but the recommendation was, they really felt like because of the size of the property and the road access to the building, that was the max.
I got a question. What if we buy the house on the corner? We don't have a square lot right now. We have an L-shaped lot. That would add, how many acres do you think that house sits on?
You say an acre? Less than an acre. We've got 7.5 there now.
I appreciate
Darn.
thinking outside the box there.
So let me come back down, now that I've adjusted the numbers.
That's 12.
And I apologize, I got lost there.
See, the problem is fitting buses and cars without flowing onto West 7th Street and stopping traffic. I mean, we do it in other areas. We stop up traffic on main roads in other areas. Let's go for 600. That's a problem. Go down Trotwood. Go take the V. Go to the left.
Well, and you know, again, I mean, obviously you'd be talking about making it probably a 3-story building if you did that, which might be fine. I don't know what all the again, I would yield to Ms. Hewlett. I don't know what the thought would be, but I think it's,
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about school buses.
no, we,
You're talking about trying to make McDowell School a 600 student school. You remember we talked about the limit would be 500. And I know Rob said that egress was a real problem. Ingress and egress was a real problem. Parking spaces that you would have to add. I don't know if there's enough room on the property to expand in the playground, those kind of things.
The original question we addressed was, could it be 800 at one time?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is no. But to add another 100, possibly, I need to look at it.
Buy that house and put in a parking lot. It's a park, I think it's big enough to accommodate parking. See if they want to sell. Eminent domain, can we claim eminent domain? Do we have that ability? Make a motion?
according to my contacts in Williamson County, they said they do that, so I don't know.
There's good community effort.
All right, so, Mr.
I was just gonna say.
Mr. Atkinson,
You could double stack the parking up in there. You could actually add
We
a
could
tier
go
of
higher
parking.
with parking. We
Parking.
could put a 2-level parking in. We could.
That's dollars. That's dollars.
Yeah. Eminent domain, 2-level parking. We're thinking differently.
all right.
We're just throwing out ideas.
All right, so I'm looking at the clock. It's 10 till 10. My goal is to get us out of here by 10 o'clock. So, what's that? Well, I mean, is there anybody, are we at a consensus? Let me ask this. Are we at a consensus that something in McDowell is going to stay in column 1? Or is there any discussion, or are there any motions about moving that over into year 2?
I went in year one.
Okay.
He feels pretty good about it. I trust him.
All right, so what was currently proposed to us is 500 is what we're looking at right now. The floor is open for any other changes or suggestions. No, buses are in, yeah. Yeah, we're gonna come back and we're gonna have a master motion in a moment. Yeah. One master motion.
Mr. Bates, just to go with your point, I mean, I would be leaning towards just, I would agree probably that something needs to stay year 1 on McDowell. I still have a problem with the 500, but I'm not enough to stop it tonight, so.
All right, well, let's understand. This is a tentative draft motion. What's that? Right, and it still is a draft, but I mean, we got to get something going so that we've got something in place. If we want to make some additional changes, at the board level, if we want to make amendments to what the recommendation is, this is just coming out of committee to make a recommendation to the board so that the board has something they can just sink their teeth into.
Stan, can you scroll down to the ugly number?
Is that everything? Can you go up? I just want to see the whole thing. So you all have the,
It's there.
That's the Spring Hill Elementary,
Spring Hill Middle,
and that's it. And 250,000 for Spring Hill High School.
and then the buses. And so
Motion
that
to
would
approve
make,
the year 1 list as presented.
all right, so we got a motion by Mr. Moore. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we got a second by Ms. Powers. All right, so we got a motion, and this is to approve a draft budget to recommend to the full board. Again, it's still subject to revisions, and it's still subject to revisions at the board level. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote.
I've got motion to approve the year 1 draft budgetal capital list as presented.
Okay, everybody
vote.
understand what they're voting on?
As,
So the 13 million for McDowell, we're not doing the 17 as far as the EMG money? Just to clarify.
My motion was for the 13, but that would, if we're still discussing, that would be up for discussion, I guess.
In my understanding, the 13 is using the 4 million.
Are we still in the discussion level?
Well, we're on discussion on the motion now, so.
yeah,
Yeah, I would probably be interested in modifying my motion to pull that back out. I'm trying to be consistent here, and I know I've said that all along, so I think I have to modify my motion then.
okay. What do you want your motion to say?
Can somebody do the math on that, the 13, to add the 4.5 million back into it?
I'm sorry.
All right, so we got a motion to amend by Mr. Moore.
So make that back to the total cost.
The 17, yes.
Okay, yeah, I'll get it right here.
All right, so we got a motion to amend by Mr. Moore. Is anybody going to second that? All right, got a second by Ms. Parker.
Okay, second by Ms. Parker, motion by Ms. So motion to amend the year one draft budget capital list to include
So we would request the full amount of the funding from the commission, rather than any deduction from what we have existing from EMG for McDowell.
$600. McDowell's 600. And a replacement it.
You want to change that to 600, then that makes the number change.
No, leave it at 5?
As the motion is at 500. There was other discussion, but the motion was
Yeah, it's a typo.
All right, so does everyone understand the motion to amend? And I guess I'll just say, I mean, if the county has provided us funding for McDowell, I guess I can see maybe a different argument that, okay, if we get the full amount of the funding, the 17.6, we can still use that 4 million for other things on our repair list. But it does seem to me that if they gave us that funding, and that was what we did originally when we kind of held things up, is, okay, should we spend that money on McDowell or not, or should we apply that to something else? So for me, I think we should apply that to what the county has already provided us for McDowell. So,
My only thing on that is I think we're getting into we're opening ourselves up to start getting picked apart on what we're spending money on. I'm trying to keep a very clear delineation between maintenance, repair, which is what the MG money was for. Even though it was for a school, we were very clear when we took that to the county commission that we can't guarantee this list. And even though McDowell and Baker and all these other schools are on that list, the goal here is to repair all of the schools in the entire county and stretch those dollars as far as we can on repairs. And I think when we did, again, I felt it was not the right choice, but when we took that money to do the Marvin Wright, that was one of the things they got onto us for, was saying that you guys said you were going to use these for repairs. I think in this instance, they may like it because it kind of makes the numbers work in their favor, but I think to be consistent for what they had said in the beginning and what we said in the beginning, I think it would be appropriate to use that money and move it on down the list, and get the repairs done that we said we were going to do. And I think ultimately it actually advances us much further. I think we can do a lot with that money as far as repairs on the rest of the schools. Actually, I think by the time we look at all of these changes, we can get very far on that EMG list and make some real progress on it if we approach it this way. And we still keep it separated between capital, construction, and the repairs.
okay. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, so this is a motion to amend where we would increase the McDowell Elementary from the 13 to the 17. Any other discussion? See, now ready to vote.
So the amended motion says, motion to amend the year one draft budget capital list to include and I've got the exact amount, 17,680,806 for replacement of McDowell. Correct? Okay. Please vote now. Do you want me to change
I meant
something?
Yes, I meant to vote no.
10-4? Okay,
I hit the wrong button, sorry.
and that motion passes 3-1.
All right, so that motion does pass. So now we're back on the main motion as amended, and so we can see what the total amount is. And just so that we have something for the record, the motion is to make the recommendation to the full board of our capital budget as presented, and we need to get a copy of this that's on the screen. But it's as presented in the total amount of $85,783,606. And if we could, after tonight, if we could get a copy of this to all board members, so that they know what, and it needs to go in the minutes as well.
Okay, so we're looking at the 85,783? Okay.
We've got 2 minutes.
6 here, I'm attacking
2
as fast as I
minutes.
can. Do you want me to put to include the bus totals?
That is included, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to say anything on there about amending the GP budget to include the
No.
bus drivers?
That's next
So
week.
just motion to approve the capital budget list at 85,783, year one, thank you. Year one, capital budget list at 85,783,606.
That's it.
All right.
You need more discussion on that motion.
Who's the motion? Moore, who's the second? Thank you.
I think Ms. Powers seconded that.
Okay.
Yes.
Any
Any
You
other
ready?
discussion? Ready to vote.
Please vote now. Motion passes 4-0.
Motion to adjourn by Ms. Parker, second by Mr. Moore. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion does carry. We are adjourned.
Motion passed 4-0.